Hi, my name is Balaji Srinivasan, and this is an interview with established author Rajiv Malhotra on the occasion of his fifth book, The Battle for Sanskrit. A little bit about myself. You know this, Rajiv, but I'll just tell the viewing audience if you don't know who I am. I grew up in California in the Bay Area, attended Stanford University and Harvard University, studied computer science, biology, philosophy and religious studies, as well as law. And recently, I started to become more interested in the spiritual technology and heritage of my Indian roots and of Hinduism in general. So I started to get exposed to you, Rajiv, started to read some of your books, and I was very intrigued by some of the things you're saying. So let me begin by asking, this is your fifth book. You've written four other books before this. What's been the journey? What's the journey been like for you as you started to get involved in this, I would say, academic discourse that I actually don't see many Indians participating in? When I was at Harvard and Stanford, it was mostly, forgive the word, but white guys teaching me about my culture.
Right, right. Well, first I want to thank you, and I want people to know that Balaji and we met in some spiritual settings, learning the spiritual technology, and I was very impressed that here's a young Indian technocrat, successful, raised in the U.S., very interested in our heritage, and I think it's exactly people like him I consider to be our future, and so my job is to open these doors of the fortress, sometimes blast them open because they're jammed closed, and then let other younger scholars and thinkers take over, take what I've started and move it forward. So very happy to be interviewed by you. Just
Well,
want you
thank
to
you
know
very
that.
much.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to be here and
Yes,
talk to you.
yes. So my journey starts as a physics person, computer science person, in technology, then in business development, management consulting, and then being an entrepreneur. Starting at one time, I had 20 companies in IT. And then at the age of 44, I had some spiritual experiences which led me to completely change my life. And I gave up these businesses, decided to create my own foundation, and spend the rest of my life. And I've been at this for like 20 plus years uh, uh, to give back, to learn, to study, and explore my own culture. So at first, I made the mistake. You make mistakes and you learn. So first, my mistake was I was funding Western scholars of Indology, hoping that with funds I could change their mind, or I could. I didn't realize that they are the problem, and when you're funding the problem, you're not going to solve the problem. You're just funding it. So I had lots of ambitious projects. I wanted certain kinds of things inquired, researched, changed, altered, and I gave grants to Harvard. I was the only guy giving grants to Harvard for Indology Roundtable we had every year, Indology Roundtable, where they discussed all kinds of Indology. I gave grants to Columbia, to Princeton, University of California, all sorts of places.
You know, on that point, I took several courses in Indology when I was at Harvard. And the funny thing was, just like you said, it was Western scholars, literally old white men. And all they were teaching me was that my culture was, for lack of a better word, stupid, demonic, idiotic, and oppressive. And I thought this was strange.
Right. I coined the term caste, cows, and curry.
That's exactly the three
kind of an
Cs.
exotic sort of a thing, and abusive and whatnot.
It made me feel
Yeah.
very ashamed, I would
Yeah.
have to say.
So I would fund not as a hands-off, write a check and stay out, but very hands-on. So I would go to all the conferences. I would engage the very scholars that I'm funding, read all their dissertations. I was exceedingly deep into reading and studying the scholarship, and I became very widely read in this area. And they didn't like it because they were hoping for somebody who just write a check and they'll celebrate the guy and give him a photo op with the dean and the vice chancellor or the president of the university and send him home. And I wasn't that kind of person. And I'm coming at it from a practitioner who is very into the tradition as a practitioner, very invested in it. So I was willing to raise issues. And so that they didn't like. At one point they said yes to Infinity Foundation, which is the name of my foundation, yes to Infinity Foundation, no to Rajiv. So
yes to the money,
yes to the money,
but no to you and your
and they would say
ideas.
things like, when we get Rockefeller, he's so busy, he's not interested in doing all that. He'll just write, and we are taking care of what he wants. Or when Templeton comes, or when so and so comes, trying to sort of feed my ego that I should think I'm too big a shot to bother with the details, not realizing that it's the details that excite me. That's what I wanted to do. So I did a lot of that before I realized that this is not going to solve anything. Then I got Indian scholars into it, Hindu practitioners into it. They either lacked the courage, or they just weren't that knowledgeable in the global discourse. They were easily duped. They're part of a system. They're too much of our civilization, and the discourse has been translated into English idiom, and the original has been lost. So they were also almost part of the same problem. And so I tried a whole lot of things. We had conferences. We probably had 100 conferences. We funded a few dozen dissertations. So we did a lot of experiments in different ways. Now, it was not a waste because I learned a lot. I learned what to do, what not to do. I learned who's who in the whole establishment, the whole system of India studies. And I started turning my critiques from private critiques to posting them here and there. And that caught on.
So got you in a little trouble, you in the crosshairs of all the Indology departments at the university.
Right. So then there was this phase of tension that, are you criticizing us or are you funding us? And I said, I thought that in the spirit of intellectual discourse, you could also criticize each other, and that's what we're supposed to do. But they were I realized it's a cartel. It's an intellectual cartel, what I call the peer review cartel. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. I hire your students. Then when I have students, I send them to you, and you hire them. We are on committees together. We are editorial boards together. So there's a limited group of elitist, very powerful Western intellectuals in the whole study of Indian civilization. And I understand this very well. The Kurukshetra, I call this the intellectual Kurukshetra, and I understand this very well. Because I've been in it, I've been a fighter, I've been a sponsor of those guys, I've been a friend, I've been a foe, all of that. So I started by writing my own small stuff, and it really caught on. And then I started writing bigger stuff. That's how it started. So my first book is the result of something that happened as follows. My kids went to a private school, and we decided to sponsor trips to Haridwar during spring break and teach them about our traditions as part of their world religions course in high school. A very liberal school. So they came back, and they were full of all kinds of exciting things. And the next thing I decided is to give them a grant to buy a whole lot of books on Hinduism in the library, so they could go the next step and actually, besides just giving tours, they could actually study these things. So I gave this gentleman, who was in charge in the school, a long list of what they should buy, in my opinion. A whole lot of Hinduism books from all kinds of authors. And he came back and said that one of the Western scholars who looked through the book list raised objection that I had listed books about Ramakrishna because he has been accused of being a homosexual and a criminal. So I just couldn't believe. This is Sri Ramakrishna.
Ramakrishna,
yes.
Wow, the teacher and guru of Vivekananda.
That is correct. And what happened is somebody had written a book called Kali's Child, a person who was Wendy Doniger's student, Jeffrey Kripal, and he accused, in his whole theory, they're using Freudian psychoanalysis, and he accused that when Ramakrishna says to Vivekananda, come sit on my lap, it's a homosexual advance. So he's got that kind of a mind to interpret.
Now, there's that Seinfeld episode where someone's asked if that person's gay, and they say, no, not that there's anything wrong with that.
Yes.
So why is homosexuality, even if it's true, being used as an attack weapon?
Because he claimed that this guy was a kid, Vivekananda was too young, and so it was abusive. That the guru is using his authority, his power asymmetry to do this.
You know, there was a recent documentary on Netflix about Yogananda called Awakenings, and it described how a similar dynamic was at play with Yogananda, the spiritual guru who came to Los Angeles, the United States in the 1930s. And the dynamic described was really of white men trying to discredit a dark-skinned Easterner
Yes.
using the modality of sexual perversion and sexual preying on
And
white women.
that is a very big phenomenon. That's a very big phenomenon I uncovered. So as a result of this, and I had to debate this particular scholar to make sure that the school is not tainted, that the views of Hinduism are not tainted, the views of Ramakrishna are not tainted. So I had to fight for this.
But Ramakrishna is such a big saint.
Such a big name. And so I then found that the teacher of this scholar, Wendy Doniger, had made a comment in Pennsylvania, which came in the Philadelphia Inquirer, that the Gita is a dishonest book. Okay, that was her statement. And it was covered in the Philly Inquirer. So I started investigating. Later she denied it, but that's in the Philly Inquirer.
You know, in a yoga studio called Avalon in Palo Alto, California, they're trying to establish themselves as a certification authority for yoga teacher training. One of, several friends I know attended that course, and one of the things they're teaching there is that the Bhagavad Gita is a book of violence, encouraging violence,
that
and
comes
it's sadistic and it's evil.
That comes from Wendy Doniger. She says that it is God's genocide. This whole group of people, they've done Freudian psychoanalysis. They're trying to read these texts not the way the tradition reads them, but using their own lens.
But when I read the Bhagavad Gita, it struck me that this is what everyone from Henry David Thoreau to Emerson to all sorts of Western intellectuals as well as Eastern intellectuals and just regular guys like me, when we read the Bhagavad Gita, we see such a profound book about the nature of the self,
right.
How to overcome and conquer negative emotions,
right.
How to be positive,
right.
How to stand for truth in the face of injustice. So I'm really surprised that there's a dynamic which I didn't know about until I encountered what was happening at the Avalon Yoga Studio in Palo Alto, that the Bhagavad Gita is being attacked by the Academy. And you're saying this starts with a professor named Wendy Doniger.
Yes, Wendy Doniger and her peers and her students and so on. So then I started doing research on this whole cabal, who are focusing on gurus, symbols, texts, and trying to twist them around.
There's a book I also recently encountered called the Guru Papers.
That's an old book, reprinted, and that takes all the early 20th century gurus and really slanders them.
That's what I noticed, and it ended with the fact that Hindu oneness, the concept of we're all one and should be in harmony, is such a powerful abstract system that it must be challenged.
Yes.
I thought this was curious.
Yes.
If it's a great system of oneness and harmony, why should it be challenged?
Because it threatens their narrative, their grand narrative. The Christian grand narrative is threatened by that. So my first book is actually, it started out as online debates. Sulekha used to be, or still is, a big blog site. And so I wrote the first article on this I called Wendy's Child Syndrome, because they had considered, their book was called Kali's Child in a pejorative way. And my book on her whole cabal, I call them Wendy's children. And so that started a huge fight. And that's when all hell broke loose between me and the Academy. Until then, for 10 years, they had enjoyed a lot of my funding. And we had kind of tension, but we were friends, and they always would write for annual grants, and I would give those grants, but I would keep criticizing them. But when I went public and wrote that series of articles, wrote a whole lot of articles, I mean, they were very shocked that somebody knew so much, somebody could write so well, somebody could mobilize so many people, and, that thing got like over 100,000 hits, and it became a big thing.
So what I'm hearing is that you started out as part of your journey, funding Western scholars in these Indology departments and Sanskrit study departments. You discovered that they were actually a cabal of close scholars with a certain vested interest. What exactly was that vested interest that made them distort and discredit Hinduism?
Well, there's two genres. There is the Judeo-Christian view, and then there's the liberal left-wing Marxist view. So there's two ideologies attacking Hinduism. The Christian you can understand because it's their enemy, or they want to convert these people. They want to build as much library of discourse as possible to show the weaknesses and the problems with Hinduism as they can, the skeletons in the closet they want to come out with. The one that is not well understood by Indians, by Hindus, practicing Hindus, is that the liberal white who comes at it from a Marxist leftist lens is also equally concerned about what he sees, and it is partly because they want to appropriate certain things, but they have problems with bhakti, they have problems with guru, they have problems with certain things that won't fit their framework.
Which is interesting because so many of my leftist, progressive, even Marxist friends, they're aware that in Hinduism there's room for 11 genders, that transsexuality is okay, that there's freedom to worship the divine through any symbol or modality you want, or you can be an atheist. They like all that stuff. So it's interesting that at the same time that they are afraid of certain components.
In the 60s when the hippie movement was going on, the liberal left were followers and devotees of the gurus. At that time, our gurus made the mistake of not converting them formally and saying, you're a Hindu. Many of the gurus would say everything is the same, you can remain a Christian and just keep practicing these things, almost inviting them to digest us rather than taking them in. So what we did is we fed this kind of a mixed up person who was by birth and by identity Jewish or Christian, but in terms of what they liked and what they were practicing, it was mostly Hinduism or Buddhism. So at some point the ego has to reconcile. At some point the guy has to either say, okay, I'm going to give up what I have been and become a Hindu, but they were not accepted. There was no acceptance possibility. And this is different than in the case of the Dalai Lama making them Buddhists officially. Mm-hmm. But the Hindu gurus are not making them Hindus officially.
Well, that's what I noticed. So many of my friends in the Bay Area, they love yoga.
But they don't call themselves Hindus. Yeah.
They love relating to the divine through their own personal symbols, which essentially the three components are of basic Hindu lifestyle. They like eating healthy, being vegan, vegetarian. But you're right. I've noticed that there's a lot of resistance when it comes to using that label.
Yes. Now, part of the mischief was done by Christians who called themselves deprogrammers in the 70s, because a lot of the kids were going to Osho and Swami Satchitanand and ISKCON. There were a lot of people going to those movements, and so Ronald Reagan was upset. In fact, his Attorney General called Osho the most dangerous, or Bhagwan Rajneesh at the time, the most dangerous man in the world. Something that you now call Saddam these guys, the ISIS and the Al Qaeda guys. They actually called him the most dangerous man in the world. So the problem was that it was too popular. It was doing very well. It was undefined. They were not called Hindus per se, but they were sort of creating havoc with the Christian base. And the Vietnam War had threatened the whole fabric of society. The 60s, the rebelliousness, and these guys, and drugs were there. So these guys were now turning into Hindus, rebelling against Western society. This counterculture movement. Mm-hmm. So a reaction against counterculture movement was a very organized series of people who called themselves deprogrammers, whose job was to turn this around, attack that, bring those kids back. They're working for their parents just to rescue their kids in many cases, and to undermine these movements. That's why there was a systematic attack legally on Osho, on ISKCON, on most of the gurus. They were attacked. I know the last surviving of the original 5 or 6 gurus who came, the one who still survives is Amrit Desai, Yogi Amrit Desai. He probably trained 20% of all the white yoga teachers in the first 20 years. And he set up Kripalu Yoga Center.
I read a recent article in Slate and 2 books which claim that yoga is not Indian.
Yes.
It's actually a creation and
of the
amalgamation of Scandinavian exercises, British military exercises, and it has nothing to do with India or Indian tradition.
Yes, and that's a very big thing. They claim that BKS Iyengar and his guru got it from YMCA in India, who brought these things. Yeah. And they needed to take these exercises and make them seem like they're Indian. They came up with these fancy Sanskrit terms. And now there's Indra's Net, my recent book, Just Getting Ahead, is also about this whole idea of Neo-Hinduism, where they take Hinduism and they try to say that this was appropriated, or many of these ideas are appropriated out of Christianity. And
what's funny is when I did my coursework in philosophy of religious studies, I encountered the Shiva Sutras, Yoga Sutras, where clearly these ancient texts in Sanskrit are recording all of these yoga postures and how
Yes.
it's part of our lifestyle.
Yes.
So the clear evidence shows that it is authentically Indian from
Yes.
an authentic Indian source. So how do they get away with this distortion?
Well, because there's no counter narrative. And that's why I decided I will create that. It was, even a lot of baloney, if nobody opposes it, becomes normal.
Sort of the big lie. That's
Even
told
the
over and
Aryan
over.
theory, when Max Muller started it, there was no peer review, there was no discussion, there was nobody from our side at the table. And for many generations, it just got accepted. So anyway, so then this huge uproar that I created as a result of my series of online articles. Later on, I decided to turn it into a book, and even that was accidental. I was just informed one day that Martha Nussbaum, a very famous feminist and philosopher in University of Chicago, she's all over the place. She's a very big name. She had written a book on the bad things about Hindus, and I had a whole chapter was on me, and so I felt, wow, I'm becoming that important. I didn't think I was that important. So somebody sent me, and she was going around giving lectures and giving them PDFs of that chapter. So somebody sent that to me. And actually I was quite concerned because I had never felt, now I don't care, but at that time I was concerned. So I went and asked
So just to be clear, this was a reaction to your critique
Yes.
of the Western Academy's distorted
Yes.
representations of Hinduism.
Yes.
And they're attacking you for being a Hindu.
for daring to criticize them.
For daring to criticize them from the standpoint of being an authentic Hindu.
Yes, and then they would accuse such a person of, he's must be supporting people who are in violence. They want to get you into that.
This seems totally different from the way, ever since Edward Said's book Orientalism was introduced, very different from the way that the Asian Studies Department, African Studies Department, Chinese departments have been transformed, where authentic Chinese, Asian, and African voices are the authoritative voices.
So here's the
Why
thing.
is it that that's not the case here?
The reason is that the Indian voices in post-colonial studies are not practicing Hindus, they are Marxists. So they brought, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a whole lot of Indian Marxists were out of work because they were not able to get funding from the Soviet Union in places like Jawaharlal Nehru University and leftist organizations. The US took these guys in. So the US found that left-wing Indian scholars were very bright, articulate, and good mercenaries. For the right price, they would do whatever you want. So post-colonial studies criticizes the British Empire, not the American Empire. That's one thing. They criticize, if they criticize the Americans, it's over Palestine, they follow that kind of a thing. But they're not defenders of Hinduism. They may be criticizing for capitalism, for the industrial complex, all those sort of things. So it's the Marxist critique of capitalism and big America and big Europe and all that. It's not from a dharma point of view. They wouldn't say here is a dharmic critique of the Abrahamic system. That the post-colonial scholars didn't do.
So what
It's a secular Marxist critique of the West, and it's almost like the West's own self-critique being copied by the Indians.
So just to be clear, what I'm hearing is that Asian studies departments, African studies departments, and other ethnic studies departments were transformed over a period of years in the 70s and 80s to accommodate the authoritative voices coming from those traditions. But when it came to Indian studies, especially studies of Hinduism,
They couldn't go beyond a certain boundary. So you look at all the pioneers in the Dipesh Chakravarti, Partha Chatterjee, all these kind of people. They are fiercely anti-West, so to speak, but they're not pro-Hindu. So where are they? There's no positive place to stand. So they've knocked down the other, but they haven't espoused the self. And therefore, who are they? Who are we? There's no positive place to stand and critique.
That's interesting.
And that is the gap I'm filling. That is my niche.
Makes sense.
Because when I critique, I'm continuing Edward Said's work in a sense, from the Hindu point of view.
Well, it was clear to me once I took those courses at even Stanford and Harvard that, hey, this is pure Orientalism as Edward Said critiques the academy.
Right.
How come no one's calling these people out when they practice Orientalism on Hindus?
Right.
I'm so glad that you're doing that.
Right. That is the space I'm trying to fill. So the first book was, because Martha Nussbaum wrote this big attack on me, I figured that my side of the story is only a bunch of blogs. And, it ought to be a book. So I really assembled all the writings and got an editor and said, "You write it." This editor convinced me that it ought to be written by other editors. A panel of editors should take my writings and make it third person because that's more objective. Rather than me versus Wendy Doniger, it should be Malhotra versus Wendy Doniger, written by third party. Mm-hmm. And that's how the first book came out.
And this first book's name, just to remind the audience?
Invading the Sacred. Okay. Invading the Sacred went out of print after many years because the publisher, after the book had been very successful, got an amazing offer to publish Wendy Doniger's book. So why wouldn't they take it? You see, it's business. So they took Wendy Doniger's book, which then created a scandal here in India. And that was long after I was done with my book, and in the process of taking over her book, they dumped my book.
Why wouldn't they want to release both books?
For whatever reason, this is the narrow-mindedness here. So somebody, and I don't want to disclose because they haven't announced it yet. Somebody in India has rights to my original writings on this whole Wendy Doniger thing, and they're going to do a book this year. It's ready, and it's going to be called Wendy's Children.
I'm so glad.
So that original fight, which happened 15 years ago, I guess it'll rekindle because this book is going to come out. It's ready to go.
Well, at that same Avalon Yoga Studio in Palo Alto, there was a book there, I think by the same author, Wendy Doniger, called Hindus, an Alternative History.
Yes.
I started reading through that book, and everything that was said did not jive with my own personal, authentic practice of Hinduism.
Right.
It was, page after page was denigration, distortion. I thought, this would be completely unacceptable and called out for the racism that it was had it been done on any other ethnic group.
And
but for some reason, not us.
They would never write a book on Islam like that in the academy.
Never.
Islam is trashed by other people, but not in the academy. The academy is very careful to be extra nice to Islam, to Buddhism, to all the other minorities.
Well, there's a recent book that just came out by this professor at Stanford, Audrey Trishke, about, very much in the same vein, about how Hindus have been oppressing Muslims for the last 800 years.
Oh, that's a very standard thing. Partition was caused because Hindus couldn't tolerate Muslims. Standard theory by these guys. And so the reason there was partition is because Muslims needed to be saved, have safety, and they wouldn't get safety. But the irony is that the Muslims here are better off than the Muslims in Pakistan. So
well, she recently published an article on India Wire, this Audrey Trishke, this professor at Stanford, and her argument was that the Muslim rulers of India were actually the most peaceful, tolerant, and socially harmonious rulers, and India needs to go back to that system.
Yeah, in my latest book, I have addressed that because the genre of Indology I'm addressing believes that to be the case. But I'll tell you that later. Mm-hmm. In a nutshell, what they're saying is that Sanskrit died 1,000 years ago because the Hindu kings killed it, even though Muslims tried to save it. So it's a weird...
That's what that argument was. I researched a bit more about Audrey, and her funding sources, I think, explain a lot of where that's coming from. But that's another
funding
story.
And the mentors, because these mentors are very prolific. They produce dozens of PhDs and get them jobs. They know how to do that. So they're creating a parampara.
Yeah.
Wendy has created a parampara. There are 4 or 5 major people who've created their paramparas, and I take them one by one in each book.
What struck me was none of it seemed to be authentically investigating a culture or the heritage. Rather, it was all political critiques based upon present-day political mores projected back onto the past.
A kind of Western idea of human rights. Human rights lens is the staple. They go and find some poor women here, somebody got raped there, something happened there, and they look at it, this must be the fault of Hinduism.
That's one thing I noticed. Every bad thing that these authors are talking about notice in any Indian general civil society, they attribute to Hinduism.
Yes.
But when it comes to Islam or something like that, every bad thing is not Islam.
Yes.
It's just extremism.
Either extremism or they're reacting to Western problems. The Muslims are victims and they're reacting to Western problems. And if there's a problem in Western society, they don't attribute it to Christianity. And often, though, it should be attributed.
Yeah.
They don't. You if you have some weird things, if you have incidents of rape or whatever, you don't say.
Well, the
okay.
whole Catholic Church child abuse scandal. People are just completely, at least as far as I know, my friends in India who are Christian, they're just unaware that that even exists.
Even in the West, the harshest critique of the church, abuse of children and all the sex abuses, is not a critique of Christianity, but the church as an institution in this era has failed to implement good Christianity. So Christianity is good still. It's not the fault of the Bible. It is not the fault of the text. It's not the fault of Jesus. It's the fault of today. Some guys are bad guys.
Now, you wrote another book called Being Different,
Yes.
I remember. And in that book, you talk about how Western thought systems or one God theory, universalizing one God theory systems, are very different from dharmic systems.
Yes. Now, I'll come to that, but before that, after my Invading the Sacred on this whole Freudian and stereotyping, the second book was called Breaking India.
Oh, okay.
So
Breaking India came before.
Yes,
Okay.
they both came in the same year, but Breaking India came before. And Breaking India is a book where I decided that I should write about the effects on India's sovereignty, rather than on Hinduism only, but on India's sovereignty, India's unity, of all this negative bashing that goes on. So it shows the fault lines that they're exploiting. There is this Aryan Dravidian fault line, there is this Dalit fault line. So there are different fault lines that have been identified by funding agencies. Ford Foundation is involved in this, Templeton Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation,
I noticed that too. There's this whole notion that I was exposed to during my graduate coursework of this Aryan Dravidian theory,
Right.
which when I traced it back, it came from this one kind of racist, imperialist German white guy, Max Muller.
Right.
But now it's being accepted as gospel in the academy.
Even by Indians.
And it doesn't make any
It doesn't
sense
make any
because in 2008, the Wall Street Journal published an income level report on Brahmins in South India and Tamil Nadu. They're the poorest of the poor, living on $50 a month. And in our tradition, every kind of story opens up with a poor Brahmin did this. And I know just from growing up that Brahmins, historically had to take a vow of poverty.
Yes. Brahmins are...
But that got converted into Brahmins, like dark-skinned Brahmins suddenly becoming white European slave masters.
Right.
I thought this theory was so absurd,
Right.
but I found that it was being promulgated everywhere I went in the academy.
And the Indian left has adopted it, and it's good for vote banking if you want votes from Dalits. You take this theory and show them to be victims. And you prove that, you try to show them that this is all got credentials because scholars have proven this, and your ancestors were victimized. The reason you're poor is because those other other castes have done this to you. So I wrote Breaking India to show this breaking up of castes, breaking up of different kind of ethnic groups within India, language groups, how it's being masterminded by foreign intervention.
So the divide and rule policy
is going on very strong. It's a 600-some page book, and it's done very well in the sense that it woke up a lot of people. And I've named names. There's over 100 to 150. My books name names.
It was in reading that book, Breaking India, that kind of my awareness got expanded to realize that all of these things I was noticing, all these weird discordances.
They're not random.
They're not random,
Yeah.
but part of a concerted effort.
Yes.
A modality of concerted attack.
Yes. And it's interesting that I was able to locate the way. I'll tell you the story behind that book. That'll be interesting. I was having lunch with some Princeton University professors because I live in that town. So some gentleman walked in and they asked him to join the table. And this guy was an African American. He'd just come back from India. And so I said, what were you doing there? And he said, I went there as part of the Afro-Dalit Project. So I said, what is the Afro-Dalit Project? So he said, you don't know? It's a well-known project. And I said, tell me. And he said that Africans and Dalits are brothers. And Dalits are actually the blacks of India. And the non-Dalits are the whites of India. And they have exploited them and they are enslaved them. And that's why they're poor. And he was giving the whole thing. And I was very impressed by his clarity of knowledge, but complete BS about the substance of it. He was so articulate and so sure of what he was talking about. So I decided I'll befriend him and try to learn more, and got to know. And in his office was a map of a balkanized India. There was Dalittstan, Dravidstan, and that is the map on the cover of this book, Breaking India. So I found out that there's an online site called Dalittstan, Dravidstan, all these kind of websites that some people have built. And so I went and downloaded some of these maps, and I started investigating further. So from him, I got some information on who funds this Afro-Dalit project. He was very helpful. And I wrote to those agencies like I'm some research guy. I'd like to understand this amazing work you're doing in India. Tell me more about it. And they thought that I'd be somebody on their wavelength. So they sent me boxes and boxes of books. And from that, I found out who are the main 15 or 20 organizations in the United States. Some are church-related, some are left-wing oriented. So there was both right-wing and left-wing people involved in this. And I got a huge amount of literature on their interventions in India through NGOs. They fund NGOs. On the face of it, they're saving poor people and doing all that, but actually they're doing this Breaking India project. So this was such a huge library I got. Then I got a few students to start scanning it and start looking for patterns. And then I discovered that this is really going on. And who I wanted to figure out who are the main players. I visited their offices. Ford Foundation in Delhi, it's very interesting. Ford Foundation in Delhi does not have a library where all their reports are kept and available for you to or me to go and look at. When I went there and said, you've been here for 50 years, you brought in so many $1 billion, could I see your reports? You would think that they would be proud and they would show off that this is our reports. But they said, we have no report in India. They're all sitting in New York, which is very strange. So I tried, I got some friends who are connected to find out, and they also said, yeah, they just, so it's almost like they want to keep it secret.
Curious.
It's very strange.
You would want to promote all the good work you're doing, unless the work is somehow not meant for public consumption.
Right. And the country you're studying should be the first place that you are proudly telling them this is what we produced about you, unless you don't want them to know. So I started investigating a lot of these agencies, a lot of these funding mechanisms, and the scholars. So Breaking India is a compilation of the forces, the foreign nexus forces doing this. I found that when they were very open, when I would write to them and say, can you tell me about your India project, some church group, and they would send me a lot of material. And sometimes I would take the names of people in India they funded, places, organizations, and then I hired some people in India to go track and see what they're doing. And I found that the funding goes in one pretext, but actually it's used for something else.
Well, a recent article I read, I think in India Weekly or some newspaper, just recently talked about a group called Emmanuel Seva, which was raided by the police in Delhi, I believe. Essentially what they were doing was taking a lot of these poor kids, abusing them, and then when Christian donors would come, kind of put them in nice clothes, have them recite Bible verses, and collect money from the donors.
Right.
And as soon as the donors left, they stripped the kids of the nice clothes and put them in rooms where they had to defecate and urinate on the floor, had no food. I was shocked. Shocked. And that's one case that was caught, so that means there must be numerous
huge amount going. If you look at
it's a money-making scheme.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry to bring money in the pretext of helping poor people, saving them from human rights violations and abuses in Indian society, accusing Hinduism as the culprit and the Western funding, the Western ideology as a solution. And then there's Indian NGOs clamoring to get that money. And a lot of people have sold out to that. I call them sepoys because they're really working for a foreign agency against their own country. And so there's a huge army of Indian sepoys and their NGOs.
Indian sepoys, these were the Indian soldiers who fought for the British commanders and shot their own Indian fellow citizens.
95% of the bullets and fired against Indians under British rule were fired by fellow Indians.
You know, a lot of my Sikh
It's not white guys who are fighting. They were the commanders, but they're getting Indians.
Well, a lot of my Sikh friends, they talk about this massacre in Delhi called Jawar or something.
Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar.
And what they joke about was most of the bullets came from Indian soldiers.
All of them. General Dyer brought in a group of Indian soldiers to do all the firing. And it was a compound, they couldn't run away. I've been there, it's a very moving site, very powerful site when you go and visit that, of actually a genocide that happened. So,
and Andrei Tritsky, the Stanford professor, in this article, a lot of my Sikh friends also talk about how the Muslim emperor Aurangzeb, committed genocide on the Sikhs, exterminating their leaders and
Right.
people boiling them in oil, and it's recorded in all
Right.
the court records.
Right.
But she recently wrote in that same article that that never happened, and that Aurangzeb was a friend of the Sikhs. This surprised a lot of my Sikh friends.
It's all revisionism.
Yeah.
It's all absolutely such a lot of nonsense. But
But
that's
it's easy to call out because the Muslim emperors kept such extensive court records of
And
all
they were
their
very
deeds.
proud of this.
They were very proud.
Yeah,
They glorified
They were,
and reveled
yes,
in their
because
deeds.
this is like killing the infidels is good merit for them.
So as soon as that's exposed, the arguments of, I guess I should put it in quotations, professors like Audrey Tritsky
Right.
just completely fall apart.
Right.
But what you're saying is there hasn't been that counter narrative saying this is false and here's the evidence, and that's the work you're doing.
That is the work I'm doing. I decided to stick my neck out, take the arrows, take the firing, which inevitably comes, because somebody has to do this work, the heavy lifting. Not only it's the heavy lifting of the research that goes into it, and then packaging it, articulating it, going around and giving talks and marketing it, because mainstream media will boycott my books. They're not going to.
Why is that?
Because mainstream media here is sold out to the left. The Indian left controls the mainstream media, and they don't like anything I'm saying because they are the sepoys.
That's another interesting thing I noticed. I'm American, so I wasn't really familiar with a lot of these politics that you're talking about. But anytime I would come to India and read Indian newspapers or Indian magazines, I definitely noticed a tremendous bias where Hinduism was constantly denigrated and other religions were constantly uplifted.
Yes.
Every bad thing was attributed to Hinduism and every good thing to Western ideologies.
Yes.
I thought that was completely strange reading Indian newspapers.
Yes, and it's amazing how many of these major figures in the Indian media got their journalism degrees from the West.
Yeah.
A lot of these figures from, the NDTV, the lady, what's her name? Barkha Dutt, and all sorts of these people. I have a whole list of them. They all go to Columbia. They go to, they go get all these scholarships in different places, and they come back highly anglicized and anti-Hindu kind of rhetoric.
It's funny. Don't they feel a sense of identity crisis?
No,
I know in the West,
because
like
they're cool.
Indians like me that grew up in the Bay Area, we're proud to be Indian.
Yeah.
When I come to India, these people don't seem very proud to be Indian. Or
They're
Hindu
proud
at
to
all.
be Indian, but not Hindu. So they're proud to be secular Indians and material. We are the IT capital. We make money. It's the material Indian, materialistic, wealthy Indian. That's the culture that they are into. But as far as their heritage, their Vedic heritage is concerned, it's an embarrassment. I'm a product of one of these elite colleges called St. Stephen's College in Delhi. Whenever I'm in Delhi, they invite me, my old friends, and we have a nice few evenings together. And they're all big shots in various capacities. And they think I'm strange because I'm the only person who's on this wavelength.
Huh.
And most of them are into, they find it very suspicious. They think I'm doing it because maybe I want to become a BJP MP or something. I'm impressing them. I mean, I tell them I have no such ambitions. I'm
You
doing
live
it.
in America.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested in the truth, and I'm exploring my
Well,
heritage.
don't they see that it's ironic that the secularism that they're so proud of is because India's Hindu majority in all 55 or 56 Muslim majority nations, there's no notion of secularism.
Correct.
So as soon as India stops becoming majority Hindu, they won't have a space.
It'll
for
become
their
the same as
secularism.
Pakistan.
Yeah.
I mean, the only difference
do they
is,
not see that? These
only
friends
difference
or
is
something?
that here we have the foundation of Hinduism, and in Pakistan they don't. Otherwise, the same people. And so
So
that
they're
is
not
what
making that connection that the
They-
reason they're
they-
allowed to be secular is that
it's not logical. It's
No.
it's ideological. The left camp, the leftist. You see, the story of India's left starts with Indira Gandhi, who loses elections and needs the left to form a coalition. So her party didn't have enough seats to make a government, and so she needed the help of CPI, CPM, these leftist parties. And so when they got into supporting her, in exchange they got all the vice chancellorships of universities, of think tanks, government, government agencies that study history, that study political science. Very smart. Rather than wanting a cabinet job in the ministry, which is what people are craving for today in a coalition government, everyone wants the cabinet job. They wanted ideological posts.
I see.
Because it planned long term. So they said if we
that's the genesis of all of these
and
weird,
those guys,
illogical
they wanted all the vice chancellors of these universities, the various humanities and social sciences they controlled, and that control even now is there.
So this allowed them to basically hijack the truthful intellectual discourse.
Two generations. For 2 generations, the Indian left has controlled the discourse in the humanities and social
getting
sciences.
funding from Western ideological groups to
Yes.
promote these distortions.
So
of
you see,
life.
the irony is the West is not in love with the left and with Marxists at home, but they find them useful mercenaries and sepoys in India because they're for sale. So the Indian left is for sale. They were for sale to the Soviets. When the Soviets went away, they sold to the Americans. So that's why I call them sepoys. And so that kind of ideology or some variation of it dominates Indian media even today.
Well, I see it all the time. I found it puzzling, but kind of investigating it further, talking with people like you, I'm beginning to kind of see what you were describing in your book, just recursing back up, Breaking India, that
Right.
a coalition of all of these forces
Right.
ranging from hardcore Christians to Marxist, leftist intellectuals have not only hijacked generations ago the discourse around Hinduism and Indian history, but now continuously fund various modes of infiltration, attack, and distortion to completely revise our truthful history.
Yes, you see, one of the most interesting case studies in this is Ford Foundation. In the 50s, there's a very important meeting of the CIA, the FBI, Rockefeller Foundation, and a few others to figure out what will the West do in the post-World War II era when the colonies are being freed up. So what's our mechanism to control the Third World War, as they called it, and in light of the Soviet competition with the Soviets. So it was considered that the Ford Foundation was considered to be the agency that will specialize in co-opting the leftist pro-Soviet people in these third world countries through money. So ideologically they are into the Marxist camp, but the West wants to fund them, to keep tabs on them, to influence them, to kind of infiltrate them, and maybe some of them will sell out. So the idea was you invest in your opponent's ideological camp and with funding,
And to hijack discourse.
slowly win them over,
So
bring them.
how did
So the Indian left was created by these funding agencies.
So
And
let me
I-
ask you one question then. How did this national security policy in that era, the Cold War era, to invest in third world, let's say for example, Indian leftist groups as a bulwark against Soviet power, how did that suddenly, not suddenly I suppose, but how did that convert into anti-Hindu?
Well, so the communists didn't, of course, the communists being leftist, always like to oppose the majority religion of their country, of the country. So the leftists in United States were anti-Christian, but the leftists in India took the same rhetoric and applied it to Hinduism.
Which is ironic because Hinduism would be the anti-Christianity.
That is correct. So in India, the left has an alliance of Marxists, Muslims, Christians, all together against Hindus. And one of the weaknesses that could be used to break up the left is that these guys are fighting each other in their home countries
So now they're united in India.
while they're
to-
divided and fighting each other. So in India, the Indian Christian and the Indian Muslim and the Indian Marxist are all together for a common enemy,
Which is the Hindu.
which is
and
the Hindu.
Hinduism.
Yeah, because that's the huge 80%. Now, what happened is when Indira Gandhi wanted this coalition to keep her in power, it was a coalition of minorities and victims. So a whole lot of
What I find ironic about that is Hinduism is a collection of minorities.
Yes.
That's all Hinduism is.
Yes.
An open source operating
Right.
system for all minorities to live together.
Right. So they started developing these scholarships on women are being exploited, Dalits are being exploited, Muslims are being exploited, in order to feed their victimhood. So if a politician can go and say, this community, I'm going to tell you that the reason for your poverty is that you are victims for many, many generations at the hands of some other elite group or dominant group. So you need to elect me so I can negotiate something for you.
So rather than the repression being a function of, let's say, the Muslim invasions
Right.
or the British colonial invasions,
Yeah.
it's a function of simply them being Hindu.
The Hindu oppression is the oppression to be targeted. So now you can get a vote bank. You see, so this
That's
is
sort of like saying that black slavery by white Europeans and Americans was the fault of the blacks themselves, and not
blacks
the fault of
blacks had
white.
blacks had primitive religion, and blacks were into all kinds of abusiveness, and it was their fault. That's the kind
And
of
that was completely challenged and discredited by all sorts of movements
Yes.
in the U.S.
Yes.
And of course, Edward Said's book Orientalism challenged that same viewpoint on the Islamic world.
Right.
But for some reason, it almost seems like this is the last bastion that is Indian and Hindu studies where hardcore racism and imperialism is allowed to stand.
Is normal. That's the normal. That's the normal.
It's been weeded out of all the other departments,
Right.
but here you're saying it is the normal.
You cannot go on in the United States. You cannot expect a Sunday morning television evangelist blasting any other faith except Hinduism. The Billy Grahams of the world and all these Pat Robertson and so many of these Jerry Falwell of the previous genre, now they are
The
successful.
700 Club.
The 700 Club, they're just blasting away that these pagans and they have this caste system and they're
Yeah.
drowning this and raping women. I mean, they would not say that so blatantly about anybody else, but
I
it
don't see
goes
that at
unopposed.
all.
It goes unopposed.
Well, I was recently exposed to this California textbook scandal where all religions are presented as great, but Hinduism is presented as evil, pagan,
Yes.
awful.
Yes, and I've written a lot about that. For 15 years ago, I started making noises about this. The other religions are written by a practicing scholar from that faith, and they take these drafts and run them by various organizations to make sure they're politically correct,
That's what I noticed.
but not in the case of Hinduism.
And I noticed that when that was challenged by people like you and various Hindu foundations, that hey, when it comes to Christians or Muslims or people of Jewish faith, Christians, Muslims, and people of Jewish faith write these drafts and make
Right.
sure their religions are appropriately represented. The same kind of Western white racist cabal that you mentioned at these universities in America, along with their Indian counterparts, wrote to the California Board of Education and said, no, that's wrong. And they presented instead this false narrative
Right.
of this revised history.
Right.
So again, I see, in so many places, but here it's at home in California,
Right.
that Hinduism is being taught at a 6th grade level as being bad and every other religion is taught as being good.
Well, there's also a fault of the Hindus because we have not produced very good scholarship ourselves. So you need to do that's what I'm trying to do, rigorous scholarship. You need to have rigorous scholarship, not exaggerate, have your references verifiable, have peer reviews. I take each book of mine, send it to a whole lot of people to critique and let me know in the thought system if there are some major fundamental flaws. We haven't had the rigor of academic grade scholarship produced by Hindus themselves. And this is something that I'm trying to, and there are people joining, and I want young scholars to come in. You should come in and help write these things, because unless we raise the standard, we cannot we cannot just go chauvinistically and get angry at them, because we have to produce some of our own stuff.
Well, the funny thing that I noticed just in my own graduate work and being now exposed and becoming aware of these issues is that the false narrative promoted by the racist Western scholars in the academy is so easily challenged and deconstructed because the extant evidence is right there.
Right.
All we have to do is present it,
Mm.
as you mentioned, in a rigorous way.
Yes.
So recursing back up, after breaking India,
The next was Being Different.
Being Different.
So Being Different is a book which is discussing philosophical, metaphysical differences, as the title suggests, between the Dharmic traditions and the Abrahamic traditions. And the byline is an Indian challenge to Western universalism. So I'm taking the Western ideas which have started with Christianity. Even Western Enlightenment and secularism preserves some of the fundamental assumptions of Christianity. And while it changes it's secular, so God is not as central, but the basic philosophical concepts remain. So I have developed what I think is for the first time a dharmic lens to reverse the gaze on Western thought and come up with how the two are different. And I'm not hiding the fact that I'm adopting a dharmic lens. I'm not pretending to be, even-handed and equal. I'm providing my team, my home team, which is the dharmic team, ammunition on how to talk back, because I think we need to do that. So each chapter is a major point of difference. So I talk about the Hindu idea of universality of Satchitanand, the nature of the self, versus the Abrahamic idea that God is separate from the cosmos, and he sends some messengers. He stopped sending them 2,000 years ago or 1,400 years ago, and now you are bound. You're limited to whatever the historical record of those prophets tells you. So there's no chance of somebody rediscovering today. There's no new messages coming. God is too busy. He won't send anybody else. There is no hotline. There's no website where you can go and get answers to your questions. So God has stopped talking, and so you are stuck with that history. And I call that history centrism. It's a kind of a dependency on history, and that history is controlled by establishments like the church and those sort of establishments.
That's one thing I noticed. Well, a little bit about my background is relevant here. I founded a technology company in genomics, which involves a lot of computer science. And one thing that struck me was that framework is very useful when applied to kind of what you're talking about, these Western universal thought systems and dharmic systems. It struck me immediately that these Western universal systems of these one God theory systems, if you will, is really the projection of political dictatorship in the spiritual space. They're closed command and control systems, the Microsofts of the world.
Right.
Whereas the dharmic systems are open source network systems,
Right.
the Linuxes of the world.
Right.
It struck me that maybe what we're seeing in your book, Breaking India, and the current political dynamic is universalizing one God theory systems like Christianity and Islam, see dharmic network culture
As a threat.
as a natural enemy and threat that has to be destroyed.
Right. So that is what's going on. And I talk about the uniqueness of Sanskrit categories, that these should not be, some of these words are non-translatable, and they should not be turned into some Western equivalent. So Atman is not the same as soul. I give these kind of whole lot of examples. So I'm arming and equipping the Hindu or Buddhist intellectual on how to hold yourself, hold your own, and argue your position in a very rational and logical way when you're faced with some kind of a barrage of attacks, which we always
Well,
have.
that's one thing I noticed when I have conversations with my Christian or Muslim friends. They immediately come with sort of a violence or aggression promoting their one God theory. But one question I ask them is, why shouldn't people have the freedom to relate to the divine energy however they wish, through whatever symbol they want? That's the open source culture.
Right.
And they just fall silent. And then they sort of go away quietly. And then when I go and look at the academic discourse or other narratives in the media, the only thing they can do is really engage in platform denial. That is, silence that voice from asking that question. How do you feel that freedom, political issues, environmental issues, all of these issues, do you feel that kind of the dharmic lens offers solutions
Of
for
course.
them that are different
Of
and
course.
more needed than Western ideologies?
Sure. I mean, you look at the liberal Westerner, while he may be Hindu phobic, the point is he's adopted yoga and meditation and vegetarianism and limiting your consumerism. He's adopted a whole lot of Hindu ideas.
The freedom to just relate to the divine however you want,
Right.
with your eyes closed or through some other symbol.
Right.
He's rejected, you're right, the liberal has actually rejected the one God theory systems of Islam and Christianity.
Right. But they have a difficulty adopting Hinduism as a kind of a formal membership or commitment to it, or considering it their heritage. They like to pick and choose here and there and make a little buffet out of it, smorgasbord kind of an approach, a cut and paste. And that can be dangerous, and I discuss that in many other works. The next book after Being Different, which I wrote, the fourth one, is Indra's Net. Indra's Net is...
Well, before we get to that, for Being Different, let me just make sure I understand, what is the central thesis?
The central thesis is that the Dharma traditions are not the same as the Abrahamic traditions, so don't go around saying everything is the same.
Everything is unique.
They are different. and what the differences are. There's the pairs of differences on a certain issue. Here is the dharmic view. Here's the Abrahamic view. I discuss them piece by part by point by point in the book. So the idea is that a person who is within the dharmic space should know very clearly this is who we are and this is who we are not, and this is we can give answers to them and hold our own. And we don't have to be apologetic and embarrassed.
Well, that's the one thing I noticed growing up is that random people, mostly Christians or Muslim friends of mine, would just say, "You're Hindu, you're bad, worship idols, you do this." And my natural reaction was, "What's wrong with worshiping idols? Why can't I make artwork representing the divine and pay respect to it?" Or, "You have to worship Allah or Jesus." I thought, I'll naturally put those two symbols on my altar at home, but why can't I include 1,000 other symbols? Why is my freedom being restricted? That's how I naturally thought. But I noticed a lot of my other Indian Hindu friends, when confronted with that same aggressive posture of questions, really felt humiliated and disheartened about their own culture. So being different, I think you're saying, helps us to figure out what's different, why it
being
matters.
different has informed a large number of Hindu writers now. A lot of people have taken these ideas and taken them and repackaged them.
So why is it relevant for, let's say, an Indian in India or an American like me who's Hindu? What's the relevance of being different?
The relevance is that you have a distinct identity. You should have a distinct identity, and people should stop saying that all religions are the same. And here is why. And I'm arguing what is distinct about our tradition and why we should be proud of it. There's something very positive about our tradition that we should celebrate. And there's no reason to deny our distinctiveness. There's no reason to apologize for it. There's no reason to say that, right now, when a person is asked to describe their faith, Hindus are often resorting to, there's nothing different, anything goes, we can be this, we can be that, and they're not able to articulate what is distinct. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so this being different in a distinct manner. And I also talk about difference with mutual respect. I'm not saying difference in a way that you're dismissing the other or rejecting them or denying them equality. Mm-hmm. Difference, but with mutual respect. It's not one way unconditional respect. Mm-hmm. It's mutual respect. Mm-hmm. So I respect you, but you must respect me. That sort of posture. That's
one thing I noticed, which is that as a Hindu, I'm very comfortable placing a picture of Jesus or a picture of some other religious symbol and paying respect to it. But the Western universalizing traditions will in no way do that. Do you find that is the central source of the tension?
Well, one of the sources of tension is that their narrative is so history-centric and so narrow that anything outside of it threatens it. It's and it's not subject to evolution. You cannot reimagine it. You cannot. We have a distinction between Shruti and Smriti. Mm-hmm. So while Shruti is eternal and constant, Smriti keeps evolving and changing. So we are not going to be stuck in the box because we keep inventing new Smritis, new ways of interpreting, mm-hmm. and we're allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have so many deities and so many experiences of so many gurus and rishis, because mm-hmm. people come and have a different experience, and we add it to our library.
Well, that's what struck me. My parents, practicing Hindus, taught me that all of these deities are just different expressions of our own consciousness.
Right.
When we pray to Ganesha, that's the mode of our consciousness related to removing obstacles. Right. When we pray to, let's say, the Shiva symbol, that's the mode of consciousness related to self-actualization. I find that that's missing in a lot of ways in the Western universalizing tradition.
Because they take a literal linear history which happened only once. It happened in one place to one person, and the whole religion forever is around that. So it's never going to happen to anyone else. It never happened before, it never happened since, and therefore that's unique, and you have to accept that or else you're doomed. So and these things were set up for political power, because to get a whole lot of people on your side in a way that they're not allowed to even think for themselves.
Well, that struck me as immediately obvious when I started to study philosophy and religious studies, that Western systems really are all about the projection of political dictatorship through restricting symbols.
And they all started that way. They all were championed by political, military dictators. I mean, Christianity as an institution was started by Emperor Constantine and not by Jesus. He was a Roman emperor and a theocrat. So he was a military dictator, and he found Christianity a good vehicle to bring all these people together under him. And similarly, Muhammad was a military guy. So you see, the militancy, the political governance and rule is all part and parcel of this. It is not purely
and it
spiritual
naturally
thing.
expresses through their
Right.
institution.
So it's not like some yogi or rishi having some insight and, it's not like that.
It's weird when I see, in computer science, the movement from closed systems to open source systems, or even in politics in the United States, where we moved from the God to the state to now the network. I see a lot of people searching for a new networked operating system, for a lifestyle, for mental thought, for happiness. It seems Hinduism offers a lot for that.
Sure. That is the theme of my Indra's Net, which is the next book. That was the fourth one. And Indra's Net, the term Indra's Net comes from the Vedas. It's a Vedic term, but it's been adopted a lot in Buddhism to describe an open nest, an open architecture.
Yeah.
So Indra's Net, if you Google it, you'll find a lot of Buddhist descriptions in terms of that metaphor of open architecture.
When I saw those pictures, what immediately struck me is they look like the graphs and subgraphs of a networked
Yes.
nodal
Yes.
system.
Yes, yes. So this, but the book itself is a critique of a certain theory that Hinduism, modern Hinduism, is disconnected from the Vedas, and it's a product of the late 19th century people who had an inferiority complex. Vivekananda was the main culprit according to them, and he wanted to mimic the West and give the Indians a sense of unity, a sense of pride, a sense of heritage. So he wanted to invent something, and he wanted to put enough old Sanskrit terms and vocabulary to make it look like it's very old, but he was getting ideas from Christianity. So the claim is that the idea of karma is borrowed from the Christian idea of work ethic. So he wanted to put that make Indians who are lazy, to get them up and working. And so he came up with this idea of karma and linked it to the old stuff. And yoga is because, Raj Yoga is because Indians didn't have science and he wanted to have something scientific. So he says this is our science. So all of this, each one of the major components of Vivekananda's theories are actually borrowed from or inspired by, directly or indirectly, from the West.
That's the false narrative.
That term is, that theory is called Neo-Hinduism. So Western scholars, I've named them each in a separate chapter, and then some Indians took over and spread it to the Indian left. You see, and all these Ramila Thapar, all these guys, Pankaj Mishra, the bestsellers, they get all these great awards. They are promoters of Neo-Hinduism. Their idea of Hinduism is that it is actually Neo-Hinduism, and you are falsely linking it with the Vedas. So Neo-Hinduism, according to them, is a sham as far as its integrity, its philosophical integrity, and its antiquity is concerned. And it became popular because it became a device for exploitation. So not only are they claiming that its history and philosophy is false, but they claim actually the motives are to harm, oppress other people. So it would be, this business of a unified Hinduism was so that we can unify people and oppress those who don't belong, the Muslims, the Dalits, women, typical.
And there's no room in that narrative for the imperial, genocidal exploitation and atrocities committed by British colonialists, Muslim colonialists.
But some of them will say, okay, those guys were bad, but all that's been superseded now by this Neo-Hinduism. So this is the rise of, this is the history. Neo-Hinduism is the emergence of Hindutva and modern Hinduism. And so when they want to discuss modern contemporary Hindu problems, they'll say it all starts with the late 19th century, Vivekananda and others fabricating and constructing this Neo-Hinduism thesis. So this Indra's Net hit these
Why
people very
the
hard.
focus on Vivekananda?
Because,
When, in the U.S., in many circles, he's regarded as the guy who kind of brought to attention this
Yes.
notion of consciousness.
Yes.
Recently, in a documentary about Nikola Tesla,
Yes.
I found that Tesla actually
Tesla and he were in correspondence.
contact. That's where Tesla started to cognize that maybe universal existential energy
Yeah,
exists.
that matter and
It's like-
energy are equivalent.
are equivalent.
The equivalence.
And I also remember reading that Henry David Thoreau and Walden Pond Emerson, when they read the Bhagavad Gita and all this, they had a new awareness of how energy and matter
Yes.
exist,
You
how
see-
to evolve themselves spiritually, overcome negative emotions.
Right.
So what I'm hearing then is Vivekananda, who started out as a hero, has been turned into a villain.
Absolutely. And the West has a pendulum that goes from romance for India, so that period of Emerson and all was one of those, to the things that would fit the Western universalism get digested, the things that don't fit, the caste cows and curry are thrown out.
So this is why, since yoga works and makes people healthy, makes them
They need
feel
to separate,
good,
they need to
say
de-Hinduize
that
it.
yoga
They need to
is
de-Hinduize it.
de-Hinduize it.
They need to
So
secularize
this
it.
explains this yoga conference that's happening, I think, in Eastern Europe sometime this year. It's called Yoga Mythology, how yoga actually has transnational origins and it's not Indian.
Right.
Because yoga works, it's not Hindu.
It has to be taken
Because
out.
meditation works, it's not Hindu.
It's a requirement for appropriation. To appropriate what's yours, I have to say it's not yours to begin with.
So when the Hinduism offers good technology like yoga, meditation, it's appropriated, it's not Hindu. Every single bad thing that happens in any general civil
Is Hindu
society
problem.
is a Hindu problem.
Yes.
Interesting.
That is.
I mean, I can't think of a more racist, imperialist continuation
Right.
of, those thought processes that have been rejected everywhere else.
Yes.
I mean, you can't say that about Chinese scholarship or
Yeah, but
Islamic scholarship.
That's
or-
because those guys own home teams, defend, and we don't.
our home teams don't defend.
Our home teams are sold out as sepoys. That's the problem. That there's far too many bright, intelligent, articulate Indians with Hindu names, Hindu background who sold out.
I mean, I see a lot of guys like me in America who are, went to the right schools, started companies, are bright, successful, but they don't have a sense of identity. And I feel that it makes a lot of them feel powerless. They don't really know who they are. Do you feel that understanding these issues that we're talking about will actually be a source of power for
It
young
should-
Hindus?
It should be. I mean, it should be for a person who puts enough effort to understand all this.
What's the practical utility value for, let's say, some of my Indian friends in America? I mean, they see me, they ask me, hey, you're kind of researching a lot of these issues, and I just kind of started my journey a while back as well, looking into all of this. They often ask me, what's the practical utility value for me? Why should I even care about my
Well,
identity?
there's values to health, there's values to mental health, to better intelligence, creativity. These things are being proven. There's value to new kinds of technologies, like we have the demonstration of the third eye, which ordinary science cannot explain. So I think that very soon you'll see many new amazing things being demonstrated, empirically tested, that could not have come out of old Western science. So you have models of the human body in Ayurveda. You have models of so you have.
That's interesting because the mainstream even cancer research is still focused on chemotherapy, but
Right.
the cutting edge cancer research, whether it's at Harvard, Stanford, MIT, whatever, it's all about immunotherapy.
Right.
That is viewing the body as an energetic system.
Right.
That struck me that Hinduism, Ayurveda, which represents the body as an energy system, has
right.
a lot to offer there.
That's correct. That's correct. So what's happening?
Just like it had a lot to offer in terms of yoga asanas
Right.
or meditation or breathing techniques.
Right.
But will that also be stripped away unless we stand for it?
Yes. Well, it's already happening. If you prescribe that you take ginger and put in hot water and you drink it, and it's going to cure certain things, the pharmacy is not going to make any money out of it. I mean, because it's a do-it-yourself, you don't
Yeah.
need anybody. But if you can extract some active molecule out of it and turn it into a white pill, you can probably charge $10 per pill.
Well, I noticed that happening with turmeric. Like we
Yes.
use Hindus, we use turmeric in everything
Right.
as an anti-inflammatory measure. We rub it on rashes and scratches. My mom used to do that for me. But now they're kind of extracting the quote-unquote active molecule, curcumin or something, and charging $20.
But the biggest scandal in that regard is coconut oil. When I first went to the United States, there was a ban on coconut oil as something, tropical oils, as something that causes cholesterol problems and heart problems, and it's a bad thing.
Now it's all the rage. It's the healthiest thing around.
Yes. What they did is they killed the coconut industry, and I have some friends who lost their thing because the tropical oils industry was no longer allowed in cooking to help the corn farmers, which is the United States' corn-based industry, rather than tropical oils. So corn oil became the right thing to have, and coconut and all these tropical oils were removed from the menu, and a huge amount of money was funded for pharmaceutical people and medical people to pump out one report after another, and there was a 10-year period of lots of negative thing about all this coconut stuff. So they killed that industry. And then it took 20 years after that, lots of new research. Now that industry is gone. Coconuts are being grown in the Western world. So now they revived it and say, okay, this coconut is actually an amazing thing.
When I go to Whole Foods Market, they're charging me $50 for a little thing of coconut oil. Okay, so, what I'm hearing then is a lot of the practical utility value for Hindus in America and in India to learn about their Hinduism is really all about the health and spiritual technology that Hinduism
and also
offers.
Environment, animal friendly. I mean, they have animal rights, but they don't have a spiritual metaphysics that rationalizes it. Because in Christianity, there is no animals don't have a soul.
Yeah.
So also environment for us. The ecosystem is sacred. It's not that I have to protect the ecosystem because we'll run out of natural resources, we'll run out of oil, or it's not to protect the economy long term that we have to be environmentally conscious. It's because the ecosystem is sacred. The ecosystem
It's life.
It's alive.
And we are not separate from it. We're part of it.
We cannot be separate from it. So
that's one thing I noticed when people ask me about why do Hindus worship cows. I always tell them about what Krishna says about that. He says, we take the cow's milk and drink it. The only other place where we take someone's milk and drink it is from our mother. The cow is like our mother.
Right.
And I thought, what a beautiful, profound, artistic way to kind of explain why animals should be revered.
When Morarji Desai, the former prime minister, the late prime minister, was visiting the U.S., the famous Dan Rather, 60 Minutes, interviewed him. And because it was a novelty that this guy wearing this Gandhi cap and very orthodox dress with Indian prime minister, and India was considered sort of a basket case, and we're giving them aid and that sort of poor country, and patronizing attitude. So here's this Morarji Desai, very Hindu, very sort of staunch in his views. So he's being interviewed, and he used to practice, was well known, urine therapy.
Oh, I heard about this.
So Dan Rather,
drink cow urine.
Dan Rather, no, his own.
His own.
There is a therapy where you take a very dilute few drops, and there's a certain procedure. I mean, it's not like you fill a glass and drink it.
It's not a dilutive procedure.
It's a dilute procedure, and you have to be cleansed, and you have to be on a certain diet for a while to produce that, and then this, in Ayurveda, this is a therapy. So, Dan Rather discusses all kinds of politically correct things about economy and this and that, and then in the end he says, "Sir, I'd like to ask you one final question, and I hope you don't mind." And that guy had come prepared, So he says, "Go ahead." So Dan Rather says, "It's commonly believed that you are doing this therapy with urine." So Morarji Desai gave a really good answer. Morarji Desai says, there's various diseases that can be cured, and do you know, he asks Dan Rather, that there are many medicines in the United States that are actually made out of urine? And Dan Rather didn't know, so he listed a bunch of medicines. He says the only difference is that those are made out of somebody else's urine that you consume, and I'm consuming my own. And this was like a really fine climax to that interview. A few months later, I was at a local pharmacy in Princeton, picking up some medicine, I don't know, for whatever, and there was a big shouting match in the back. There was a woman just angry at the pharmacist.
Mhm.
And they're all very embarrassed because she's creating a scene. And in the US, they're very quiet, and diplomatic, and nice people. They don't do scenes. They don't shout and all. They're very.
I'm still uncomfortable when I come to India and people jostle,
Yeah.
shout, and yell. I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah. So this woman was really livid, and so after a while, I just sort of stayed out of it. And when she left, those pharmacy guys at the counter were very embarrassed now. So I went and I said, "What happened?" I asked this guy who was being shouted at. So he says she was very angry because she says that she's been prescribed this medicine for years and she's been taking it, and she finally read that little thing that you unroll and you read all the fine print, and in there it said it's made from the urine of a mare. Horse. And she says that you are feeding me horse piss and for 20 years and you never told me, and it's your job as a pharmacist to tell me what I'm going to be taking. And he says, ma'am, we just gave you, the doctor prescribed, you talk to the doctor, we don't make this medicine, we just sell it to you. But she thought that they should have informed her. So actually I went back and checked all this, and Maharaji was correct. A lot of medicines come out of these kind of substances, and the aesthetics. It's not that the molecule is the problem, but the aesthetics is changed because it's a white little pill. Until the woman realizes what it is, and then she's angry at it.
Which is funny because now the whole movement is towards natural herbs, natural therapies,
Right.
unprocessed.
Right.
And when I read about a lot of the origins of these therapies, they come from Indian or East Asian sources.
Yes, they come from a large amount of the pharmaceutical products come from tropical countries, old traditional societies, and pharmaceutical industry has scouts.
Mhm.
They go to these places and they
Like
see
tulsi, neem, turmeric.
most things are like that.
Yeah.
And the French Institute in Pondicherry, which is considered to be helping them and giving funds to preserve their plants and scan their manuscripts, and they have the most beautiful library, air conditioned. You can go and have a nice. You can spend the whole day.
Visit there sometime.
Local scholars go there for the Indological because there's the best Indological research. When I walked in, I look at things differently. So on the bulletin board, I keep looking at what they're doing. Seminar after seminar on Indian botanical treasury. Indian botanical plants, documentation, compiling, building databases. They have all that going on. And so when I asked, the Indians are working there, all the people are working there, Indians. They're very proud that all this money coming, somebody's got jobs and their job is to do all these tests and take samples of plants, document their properties and ship them to France. So I said, well, who is funding it? Oh, these great people. And so I did some research. It's a French government front, but behind it, funded by the pharmaceutical industry, for the last few decades, to really get this knowledge. It's all digestion of Indian botanical knowledge, medicinal knowledge, and documenting it, getting patents, making medicines out of it. So there's many such projects going on.
Another form of culturally digesting
Piracy.
new technology.
It's biopiracy.
Biopiracy.
One of the projects that my Infinity Foundation did was there was a gentleman in the Himachal mountains areas. He said that there are lots of oral traditions, not even documented in Ayurveda, where they have a large number of medicinal value from various plants. For human beings, they treat animals with it, all sorts of things. So he wanted a grant to document that and research that. I didn't quite know about whether to do it or not, but this guy was very persistent, and we owed him something because he'd done so much good work for us. So I said, okay, let's give you a grant. And then I went there once to see what he had come up with. Over 1,000 medicinal plants that are not even in Ayurveda, that are kind of what he classified as tribal medicine. I mean, I don't like that term, but that's what he called it. And he says that they transmit it orally, in the sense that these are not literate people. They transmit it through songs. And in the song, this plant is the deity and it has a name, and this is the harvest season when you harvest it, and this is how you use it. So in the song is a story of how you grow this, harvest it, and how you use it. And the most amazing thing is, a few Western researchers in anthropology, tribal knowledge, human rights, women's rights, how to help them, how to provide them clean water, all of that at the front had really come to document this. So you see, this kind of a asset of India is for sale. It has been sold for the last 200 years. It's still being sold, and we don't have people who are vigilant. We just don't have people who care about this.
Interesting. This reminds me of my great aunt. She was telling me about this plant that her local doctor uses, dissolves it into sort of a liquid. Over maybe a 3-month period, drops of this liquid dissolves cataracts. So you don't really need a cataract surgery. And this was just passed down orally from the doctor's ancestors about this plant. There's probably thousands of botanicals like this.
Right.
And they're in the process of, again, being culturally digested, sold off, patented, and sold back to us.
And then we're very grateful. We're very grateful we got this know-how.
Mm-hmm. Even though that was our know-how to begin with.
Right. Wow.
So, in being different, and in Indra's net especially, what is the outcome of all of these observations?
The outcome is that what the average Indian knows is not the truth about his own self. This is the neo-Hinduism thesis is all over the place. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily use that term, but you will see lots of Indians saying, "Oh, Hinduism is a construction of the British era." They will talk like that.
Yeah.
Lots of them say that. India is a construction of the British era. India didn't exist, and Hinduism didn't exist, and it's a nationalist, Indian nationalist created Hinduism to fight the British.
What's funny is the way that nationalists or right-wing nationalists is used, it's coded language to describe Nazis.
Right.
So they're essentially saying that Hindus are Nazis.
And in this next book, The Battle for Sanskrit, he accuses Sanskrit as being the source for Nazism.
This new book here. So this is the 5th book.
This is the 5th book.
The Battle for Sanskrit here.
And I'm here on a book tour to launch this book. And in Bangalore, we're doing the first public lectures on this book.
I like this. It says, is Sanskrit political or sacred, oppressive or liberating, dead or alive? So if we make the kind of observation that a lot of our knowledge is encoded in the software of oral tradition, in the software of regional languages, in the software of Sanskrit, why is Sanskrit forming the nexus of this battlefield?
Well, because I'm critiquing a very prominent school of Indology who are considered the champions of Sanskrit studies, including the government of India has given them Padam Shri awards and given them national awards for Sanskrit scholarship, and everybody considers these to be the best Sanskrit scholars in the world, and we are so indebted to them, and they are the most learned people. And I'm finding that their spin on Sanskrit is something that contradicts the traditional view. So I have position this book as insiders versus outsiders. Mm. The insiders are those with Shraddha, with they're practicing, they have sadhana, they are the real original sadhu type people, and for them it's a way of life, and they subscribe to the whole philosophical Vedic worldview. That's the insider. The outsiders are people who view it as a secular system that has nothing sacred about it. It's just a language. It's a language of certain people that is not themselves, and they want to study it, and what they are doing is looking at it through the lens of political oppression, political exploitation, social oppression.
So Sanskrit is a language of political and social oppression.
Yes. So
that seems like a really far stretch to make, but they're making it.
Yes, because when we use the word Sanskrit here, it means Sanskrit and Sanskrit texts. So they will find oppressiveness in Vedas, in Mahabharata, in Ramayana, in all kinds of things. Mm. And this is based on the whole worldview of the Vedas, according to them, is to privilege and protect the hegemony of the Brahmins to oppress other people.
Also, this connects back to that false narrative Aryan invasion theory that Sanskrit language and these quote-unquote Brahmins came from Europe, made everyone in India and I guess Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, wherever the Hindus were, their slaves.
Right.
I always found that really frustrating because when I look around and I see some of the Brahmins that I know, they're pretty small and weak. They don't really strike me as the conquering type.
They're not. So you see this.
In fact, I often look at them and I go, God, man, you guys are so weak and scrawny.
So there's 3 questions in the byline. Okay, so as you read out,
can we say that before we get into that this worldview that's being falsely promulgated about Sanskrit is also coming from that same cabal of close-knit, kind of racist,
yes.
Western imperialist scholars
yes.
who also hijacked Indian Sanskrit scholarship from the academy.
Right.
And this is counterposited against actual practitioners of Sanskrit as a system of thinking and a worldview.
That's correct. And so that's absolutely correct. So the 3 questions are, is Sanskrit political or sacred? So the first choice is the other side, is that they will say it's political, and mine is it's sacred. The second is it oppressive or liberating? So the first choice is the other side, they'll say it's oppressive, and I'll say it's liberating. And then the third is it dead or alive? The first choice, dead, is their view, and alive is my view. So the opponent's view in this discussion, according to them, Sanskrit is political, oppression, and is dead for the last 1,000 years. And my view is it's sacred, it's liberating, and it's alive. So that's the whole book in that byline.
What's funny is when I was on a trip to Bali, Indonesia, that's one of the last Hindu majority areas in Indonesia. All the people there, are Asian.
Yes.
And they view Hinduism as alive, liberating, and sacred.
Right.
They have this system called the 3 Hatha Karna, which is the 3 causes of happiness that these Balinese Asians practice, which basically means for them, Hinduism is how to maintain sacred relationships with yourself and others, how to maintain a sacred relationship with the environment, and how to maintain a sacred relationship with the cosmic existential divine energy.
Right.
So for them, Hinduism is completely, I would say, on this side, sacred, liberating, alive.
Right.
They never viewed Hinduism as some oppressive Western ideology imposed on them. It almost seems like the political dictatorships of these Western systems, Christianity, Islam, Marxism, they're engaged in a lot of psychological projection.
Yes.
Like all of their critiques about what Sanskrit is, political, oppressive, all that stuff, it's really what they're doing.
Right.
When they call Sanskrit supremacist and oppressive, well, isn't saying that Allah is the only way or Jesus is the only way and you're a heathen, you're a pagan, that's oppressive and political.
Right.
So would you say that this is, the battle for Sanskrit is really a battle of projecting politics into the study and presentation of Sanskrit?
Right. There's a term, philology, which is used by linguists. It's a term that means how to make sense of texts. So it's a science of studying texts, interpretation. How do you interpret some old text? Now, philology has been there in India, so there is Indian methods of reading texts. How do you make sense out of a text? Okay, and philology is also, there are many Western theories on how you do philology. Now, what this particular school that I'm criticizing has done is they've added some qualifiers to philology and come up with their own system of looking. So they practice what they call political philology, which means you look for political powers games, oppression, who's exploiting whom, and your purpose. They're Marxists. Marxists are always.
But they applied that same lens to, let's say, Islamic texts.
These guys haven't. They would answer by saying, "Oh yeah, somebody should, but it's not my area." So they'll cup out.
But I noticed that the academy will never approach
Islam the same way.
Islam the same way.
I'm not aware of a political philologist applied to Islam and Quran and all that the same way. I mean, I'm not. So what they're doing is their political philology lens basically says that you look at the old Vedas and the Ramayana, and you look for, was Ram oppressive husband, and did he exploit the Shudras? And you look in the Vedas that there are some restrictions. Shudras couldn't do something. Brahmins have to do the yagna. Somebody else is not allowed to. They really pick out. They work so hard to pick out a few things here and there. Yeah. There may be many counterexamples, and there may be many other possible explanations which I point out here.
Yeah.
But for them, the idea is to show that this whole system is a system of domination, and this was spread. Now, the reason, according to them, Sanskrit spread successfully is an amazing theory they've come up with, is that Sanskrit was so powerful and beautiful as an aesthetic language that in Sanskrit you could express things that would move people, stir people. And so you could show the king is the great king, and you could have great praise for the king and show his power in a very beautiful, poetic way, and make all the people feel very patriotic
So
and
there's
proud.
some license to give into the beauty of poetry.
Oh,
of Sanskrit.
tremendous. They constantly appreciate the beauty of poetry, and they constantly appreciate Sanskrit's aesthetic appeal. But what they're saying is that this is why it was very successful as an exploitation tool, because it's so beautiful. So I'm exploiting you in a way that you don't even know you're being exploited, because it's so beautifully done. And so the nexus between the king and the Brahmin was that the Brahmin would would make the king, through his poetry, look superior and dominant and acceptable.
This seems like a basic projection of exactly what you described with the political Western religions of Christianity,
Right,
Islam. It's
right.
actually the dictator
Right.
and the priest or the imam working together to oppress. They're simply extending that to
Yes,
Sanskrit.
that is what they're doing. So there's a huge,
And
very
they're also connecting that, I assume, with the Aryan invasion theory promoted by the noted racist Max Muller,
right,
which says that, hey, this also came from white Europeans.
right,
And so they were actually doing black slavery on black Indians.
right. So
It seems very, very twisted and such a stretch to make it work.
right. So
So there's no indigenous credence given to Sanskrit as something that's indigenously Indian, good for India, and the source of Indian wealth, prosperity, and happiness.
well, they would say that Sanskrit is an amazing language in the sense that it's got beautiful poetry, but it's been misused for exploitation. Because the exploitation is done by making the oppressor seem very poetic, very nice.
Now, how do they address various extant texts, especially by Chinese travelers to India, such as Fa Xian, Huang Song, who came through, let's say, the Gupta period and other periods and traveled all over India, where they describe the Brahmins as the poorest of them all and
They
the
ignore that.
Shudras as the richest.
They ignore that evidence because it doesn't fit their evidence. If it doesn't fit their theory.
And what
So-
about the conclusions of Fa Xian, that this Chinese scholar, Buddhist scholar, that the Sanskrit language and the Vedic system was a distribution of power to four power centers.
Yes.
Shudras, who were the wealthy landowners,
Right.
Vaishyas, who worked with money and currency, Kshatriyas, who could not own property but could only administer it, and Brahmins, who had to take a vow of property and were essentially the professors of the society.
Right. This is my. I have a counter argument. That's my counter argument, and I call it Varna 2.0.
Yeah.
That this is another way of looking at it as
It's
a
and
distribution.
again, a network operating system
Yes.
distribution.
Yes.
But the thing is that's supported by all the non-Western travelers
Right.
who came to India.
Right.
Even when I read through, as part of my graduate work, a lot of the Muslim historians who invaded India, they only wrote about how the whole Hindu society, Al-Hind they called it, was a harmonious society consisting of these four groups who worked together in harmony. Shudras were never described as slaves, but rather the wealthy landowners.
Al-Biruni did a lot of that. Al-Biruni was a guy who came and talked about Indian science, how advanced it was, and many other things he wrote on India. But this school is important. I found out about a year and a half ago.
So this school seems to be easily disproved by all the extant evidence available
Well-
from non-Western travelers.
Well,
and
but the thing is that they
scholars.
produce thousands of pages of very high-flown English, very complex and convoluted English. And when I started studying this school, I tried to get the help of a lot of traditional scholars. None of them could understand. So you cannot refute something unless you can understand it. And since the discourse has gone into an idiom in English, which is very heavy, filled with references to Marxist and leftist thinkers. So the Indian who's reading, even if he knows English, he cannot understand what is he saying.
He has to unravel and unpack the
So, for
constant
instance-
discourse coming from.
Right. For instance, you would not have heard, or most people I've talked to have not heard of a thinker called Vico, a 17th century Italian, very centrally used in their thesis. Okay, and that is used to take the Paramarthika, the transcendental realm, and the Vyavarika, the worldly realm, and using his logic to say that the Paramarthika realm is useless, you'll never progress, it's a sign of being primitive. and Vivarika is how you advance. So that's a Marxist idea.
It's another expression of racist imperialism projected into Sanskrit studies.
Because they are taking European ideas and projecting them here. Yeah. Then there's somebody called Benjamin. So Benjamin is used a lot in this school because he came up with this idea of the aestheticization of power. When Nazism emerged, because Germans had a depression, there was an economic depression. So Hitler came up with this euphoria and this patriotism and blame it on the Jews and brought himself into power through democratic votes, democratic elected. So the question the Marxists faced is, why didn't they have, since they were poor, they had a depression, why didn't they have a class struggle? Why didn't they have a communist revolution? Which is what Marxist theories predicted would happen. So when Russia had that revolution, okay, so why Lenin started that revolution? Because they were poor peasants, and so he got them organized to have a class struggle and a communist revolution. So why didn't the communists succeed in doing the same in Germany? So they couldn't use, the traditional classical Marxism could not explain it. So Benjamin, who founded the Frankfurt School of Marxism in Frankfurt. So these Germans said, we got to revise Marxism and come up with a new theory. So this theory is called the aestheticization of power, which means that power is aesthetic, so aesthetic that the people are mesmerized. They don't think that you are in power, but actually you are, through poetry, through art, through drama, through cinema, the Nazis were able to make everybody feel good. Okay, so that means everybody is happy with them. There's no reason to overthrow them. There's no reason to have a communist revolution and get rid of them, because we're all feeling very good psychologically. Emotionally, we are feeling very high. So this theory of the aestheticization of power became the Frankfurt School's explanation of why the Nazis were able to succeed and prevent a communist revolution. So this school here that I'm referring to picked the aestheticization of power and applied it to the rise of Sanskrit throughout Asia. And they said Sanskrit was the language for aestheticization because it's such a beautiful, powerful language. They give all the praise to Sanskrit and say, therefore, it's the language that the elite could use to stay in power.
Interesting. Because there's no extant evidence of actual, unlike kind of the Western universalizing traditions of actual conquest, killing, genocide, bringing people into kind of the powerful political dictatorship. This theory now states that, well, they were so beautiful in their poetry that they tricked people into being oppressed.
So it was a kind
that seems frankly very absurd.
Yeah, it was a kind of a conquest of the mind without military requirement. So the thing is so beautiful. So he says that's why they commissioned, the performance of Ramayana in all these countries, in the Southeast Asian countries. The theory of Ramayana spreading is because it allows the king to be perceived as he's divine and he's this sophisticated guy.
What's fascinating about that is in the the Thai kingdom, actual Brahmin priests still perform pujas for the king. Same thing in Cambodia, in Bali.
Right.
And the reason I found that the Ramayana, when I talked to my Thai friends and Cambodian friends, the reason the Ramayana is respected is precisely the opposite. It's that King Rama abdicated power.
Right.
That was such a profound shift in consciousness that it shook the whole world.
Yes.
That in all of the other traditions, if you read the Persian, the Shahrazad, the history of kings, or all these traditions, all about the conquest and quest for the throne, killing your brother. But Rama, when his rightful place to the throne was given to his brother, simply calmly said, that's fine. And that's why they said they respect the Ramayana so much. So actually, that's the opposite of exactly what these guys are saying.
But they're not bound by facts. They're not bound by actually looking at counter evidence. No counter evidence is provided. Some of these people, some of the writers I'm critiquing, have 200, 300, 400 pages of major tomes focusing on how one king after another sponsored Buddhists, sponsored Brahmins to go and turn these texts, Sanskrit texts, into theater, into poetry, into kavya, and they sponsored these performances because this would be the aestheticization of power.
So there's no allowance for the notion, the factual notion that all of these dramas, aesthetics, stories spread.
Had sacredness.
Had sacredness, that
Yes.
they spread values that the
Yes.
Balinese call the Three Hatha Karna, how
Yeah.
to maintain good relationships,
so that's-
how to feel good,
So
how
that's
to
the first question.
live,
Yeah.
in a authentic, integrated, responsible manner.
Right. So
There's
that is
no
a-
allowance given for that.
So the first debate, is it political or sacred, is exactly that. So they have something called political philology, so which I just explained, that looks at everything, every one of these texts through a political motive. For why the text was adopted is because it served the elite political motive.
So that's the overriding presumption, and they try to make the data fit that. And all the counterfactual data is simply filtered out.
Simply ignored. And my counter to that is I want to promote, and I coined this phrase, sacred philology. So we look at the same texts from a sacred lens.
Sure.
So these are the two views. The insider view is sacred philology, and the outsider view is political.
Well, that's the same thing I saw when these guys at Avalon Yoga and Wendy Doninger is all talking about the Bhagavad Gita being a genocidal text promoting violence. I thought, wait, if you understand the Bhagavad Gita Mahabharata, it's all about how the Pandavas, a group of princes, kept allowing their cousins to constantly be aggressors and take their land and continue oppression until finally they had enough. And the Bhagavad Gita is about the exploration of when you're confronted with aggressive evil that won't stop, what should you do?
Right.
So it's all about the last resort,
Right.
as opposed to promoting genocidal violence.
Right.
The whole dialogue is, well, I don't want to fight, I want to be peaceful. What happens? Should I adopt self-defense? And they twisted that
Right.
into making it a text of genocidal
Right.
violence.
Right.
So, again, an injection of political motivation
Right.
into sacred text.
Right. So the
What's their
second,
vested interest there?
well, because
Gives them a career security, job
no,
security?
no, ideological. I mean, why are people leftists? Because they're ideologically convinced. They're atheists. They don't like sacredness, and they're looking to blame sacredness as a source of exploitation of.
But that critique won't be launched against the political Western universalizing religions of Islam.
Well, what they'll say is, I'm not an Islam scholar, maybe others should do it. I didn't stop them from doing it. I'm a Sanskrit scholar, I'm doing this. That's a nice cop-out.
That's a nice cop-out.
That's a nice
They won't engage in actual comparative philology.
yeah.
You should encourage them, say, hey, you'll gain a new career benefit, new funding sources.
Right. So the second question out of the three is whether Sanskrit is oppressive or liberating.
So my experience in Bali, the Balinese regard it as liberating, the three hatha karmas.
Sure,
How to
that's our
maintain
view.
modes of
That's our view. Now, I'll tell you what their logic is, because I always go into great detail to understand their logic.
Their logic for why Sanskrit is actually oppressive.
Yeah. So the logic of this school is very, very amazing. The logic is that Sanskrit was a source. Orientalism, by Edward Said, blamed Europeans for a lot of oppression and colonialism and these kind of things. But we've discovered that actually they studied Sanskrit and got this idea from Sanskrit. That oppressiveness, so they coined the term deep Orientalism, which means Orientalism that's deep in Sanskrit. Sanskrit structures and Sanskrit texts lend themselves to discourse that is oppressive. And the Europeans came to India, they fell in love with Sanskrit, and they studied these things, and they got the ideas, and then they started oppressing in colonial ways. And the Nazis took these Sanskrit oppressiveness and turned it into the Holocaust. That's what they say.
So again, it seems to me a classic
Blame
psychological
Sanskrit.
projection. It's actually one God theory systems such as Christianity and Islam that institutionalize the concept of the other, the heathen, the pagan, the kafir, thousands of years ago.
But except these people are atheists, so they will not promote Christianity or Islam. They will say
but rather than noting that those institutions actually institutionalize the other, they're saying actually they were all fine until their encounter with Sanskrit. And
So-
Sanskrit was what made them institutionalize
Right.
the notion of the other
Right.
and the oppressed
Right.
and the oppressor.
See, once you remove the sacredness out of Sanskrit, you remove the Paramathika realm out of Sanskrit, the transcendental realm out of Sanskrit.
So they basically psychologically project anything they want into
Yes.
dead words.
into that. So then they, having removed all that, then they are looking for political exploitation and oppression as the reason for its success. So there is this grand Sanskrit cosmopolis which thrives for all over South Asia and Southeast Asia. What a great thing! And Indians clap, thinking, "Wow, they're praising us." But what they're saying is, when you read beneath the surface, between the lines, what they're saying is that the reason Sanskrit was so successful is because it's so beautiful. It lent itself to the aestheticization of power,
Yes.
and it could hide the oppressiveness, so that everybody is sort of compliant with it, and they're told all kinds of mumbo jumbo.
And what's the actual oppressive quality of this Sanskrit,
Uh,
according to their
exclusion
false, twisted logic?
exclusion of non-Brahmins from the power structure, from reading Sanskrit, from doing the yagnas, and the king depends on the Brahmins in order to be boosted through the
And
aestheticization
again,
of
they
power.
filter out the counterfactuals of the Chinese travelers who say that the
Not only-
Shudras were the most wealthy of Al-Biruni.
I've given so many arguments about how there was not just those guys, but actually real evidence. We had a Shudra dynasty of kings. There are so many examples of very successful, powerful people that were Shudras. And there's examples of Shudras becoming landless under the British system. And these landless Shudras became today's disempowered landless laborers. Their ancestors were landowners.
That's true. Even in Tamil Nadu, in the Chola kingdom, the cycle of kings would be selected from either Shudra, Vaishya, or Kshatriya class and would rotate through. And Prabhudeva Gounder, who went to establish Angkor Wat in Cambodia, actually came from one of those classes. So what they're basically trying to do is equate the Marxist notion of class
Right.
to the notion of Sanskrit caste.
Right.
That is to
Or
say,
Varna.
Varna, say high Varna means high wealth, means white slave master, means
Right.
oppressed,
Right.
when actually the Varna of Brahmin was the one who had no money, was in poverty, but
Right.
was the equivalent of the modern day professor at a university.
Right. And a professor who would basically survive on very little material wealth.
Right.
And he was into high learning, and he was not into accumulation of wealth, nor did he have political power, which the Kshatriya had.
And the quote unquote low Varna, the Shudra, was actually the wealthy landowning class.
Right.
So it's actually the inversion of the classic Marxist class structure.
Correct. So you see,
Actually, it's a decentralized power system with four nodes and corners.
I'm describing this whole multiple hierarchies. I'm calling it multiple hierarchies in our system. It's not a single hierarchy.
And it's actually, strikes me as a check and balance system.
Yeah,
You're a professor, you're focused on knowledge,
Right.
well, you have to be in poverty. You have to be a Brahmin, so there's no vested interest.
Right.
You're a Shudra, well, you own all the wealth, but if you need knowledge, you have to change your mindset to become a Brahmin.
Yeah, it basically keeps the different types of assets, different types of intellectual property, material, economic property, physical land property, that sort of a thing. Different asset classes into separate hierarchies or separate
Orders, you might say.
Orders.
Yeah.
And so this is a network. Again, I talk about this book as a sort of a network of capital. There are different forms of capital.
And it's a liberating form of capital.
Yes.
Does that explain, when you read a lot of the Chinese or even Indian records or even the Greek records of Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador, or Al-Biruni, they describe a lot of the wealth of India. That's what attracted the Europeans in the first place. Do you feel that Sanskrit, this liberating structure, network structure of decentralized power and orders, is that the separation of all of these asset capitals?
I
Is that
think-
a source of wealth creation?
I think that we are probably going to, economic theorists are probably going to go back to that, because right now what you have is you have too much concentration. You have politicians who are supposed to be Kshatriyas also in bed with tycoons, businessmen, and becoming billionaires.
Mhm.
So that's the corruption. Yeah,
Right.
that's a conflict of interest.
We actually have centralization of power
Right.
and an imbalance of power
Right.
instead of a decentralized distribution of power.
Right, and Shudras are basically people who may not, who basically have, today you will say knowledge. Today, a lot of workers who don't own the company, who are not Brahmins in terms of intellectual, they own a lot of equity. So today you could say that the ethics of decentralizing, sweat equity is a way to empower the Shudras. So these things, as long as they're not by birth, the only thing I insist on is that it has to be by merit. So the Varna of a person should be by merit, and you don't have to get into the Varna system. And a child of somebody who's
It's really referring to the mental setup of the person, is
yes,
it not?
yes.
So this school of thought, which is coming from kind of a Marxist origin of worldwide historical class struggle, these scholars from the school have kind of imbued it with the racial struggle overtone,
Yes.
and have separated what used to be occupational asset classes into racial divisions that are fighting each other.
Right. Now I'll tell you the most important story, which is the beginning of this book, why the book was written. Shringeri Mutt, which you know is very important, Adi Shankara's first mutt, the Shringeri Peetham, started when Adi Shankara wanted to spread this. That is potentially being hijacked by these people. So that's why I wrote this book, to bring awareness. A few wealthy Indians in Wall Street area, not knowledgeable about the Western Academy and all the baloney, are wanting to endow chairs. So this is a fashion that's going on, and I'm opposed to it, because rather than endowing chairs there, we should endow chairs here and create a home team here. Your money goes further, it's closer to the gurus, and we closer to the insider. But it's more fashionable to sit on a board in Colombia and so on. So I was told that $4-5 million have been raised. What do you think? Do you want to be part of this? And I was very concerned. So a chair to be the selection committee of that chair would be the person I'm criticizing here. Okay, so that's why I started.
So the selection committee of the chairs that these Indian financiers wanted to endow
believe in these ideas.
Believe in these ideas, which are inimical, antagonistic, and entirely hostile.
But they are very politically. They are themselves doing the aestheticization of power. They go to Jaipur Literary Festival year after year, and they're so beautiful. They're wearing nice dhoti with a tilak, and they have a picture with the Chakracharya, and they talk about, this particular poetry and this particular guy, and the Indian audience is sitting there, are so impressed because they don't know anything.
Yeah.
And now this white guy is saying a few nice things about them. So
I'm reminded of this.
They are doing
the Ramayana, which was taught by two white professors, I think from Harvard. Or Berkeley, I can't remember now, but the whole Indian audience was just in rapture that these two white guys were telling them about the Ramayana.
Yeah. So these guys are practicing, and I have this thing on, can I apply their theories on them? So I'm applying the aestheticization of power. I'm saying that just like the aestheticization of power is supposed to be how the Brahmins and kings conspired to spread Sanskrit. Now what's happening is these very wealthy NRIs raising money with these guys as the new Brahmins, in a sense, because they are the ones studying Sanskrit. It's they who are aestheticizing their power before the Indian masses, who really don't have much knowledge. They don't have much knowledge. So what is going on is they cut a deal, they wrote an MOU apparently, or they had some handshake agreement with these main administrators in the Shringeri Peetham. And the idea was they would set up a chair for Adi Shankara chair for religion and philosophy, sponsored by the Peetham, Shringeri Peetham. Yeah.
So they get the brand name and equity of the Shringeri Peetham,
and they
the
represent
money of the Indian financiers,
but control the content controlled by them.
But
content
the control, and to be precise, the content would be controlled by the same racist, imperialist.
The people that I'm criticizing. The people I'm criticizing.
Yeah.
The people I'm criticizing here. So the idea.
I call them racist, imperialist.
Well, I call them people who are projecting Western superiority, Western models of thinking onto Indians, falsely accusing the Sanskrit tradition for all kinds of problems in a very one-sided way.
In Orientalism studies, in the movements that took back control of Asian studies, African studies, and ethnic studies departments, it was fine to call those people racist.
Yes.
Can we use that word? Are they racist? I'd like to use that word.
You should. I mean, that's up to you. You should do that.
I mean, it strikes me what they're doing is very racist.
Yeah.
I want to call them out on it
Yeah.
because I attended their graduate programs at Stanford and Harvard, and everything they were saying to me was completely racist. But as a student, I kind of silently just nodded. But now, as I'm having an awakening,
When you look
about
back,
this
you
issue,
say, okay.
I look back and I say, this would not be tolerated if you started calling Chinese people some of these terms, or
Right.
African people
Right.
some
Right.
of these terms,
Right.
or Arabs some of these terms.
Right.
It would be hugely controversial. You'd lose your job for this. But
Our people don't protest, and now I'm protesting. So this is a protest book. In a sense, it's a book to start us looking at them, doing a Purv Paksh on them. They are the Purv Pakshin, and I invite them for debates. I invite insiders and outsiders to sit as equals and talk about these things. So, but back to the story. The idea was that they will
just
become...
to recurse back up, these same cabal of Western scholars who are inimical and hostile to
Right,
Sanskrit
right.
have that Marxist lens.
Right.
They wanted to have an association with Sringeri Mutt,
Right.
a Hindu monastery
Right,
in India
right.
of Adi Shankara's lineage,
Right.
a very important guru,
Very important.
and take that brand name, take the money from certain Indians, but control the content
Control
of
the
that
content.
share.
Control the content of the
And
share.
how would they control that content?
Because they would...
or what is their goal in
They would
controlling the content?
they would select the occupant of the chair.
Okay.
He would be teaching Adi Shankara according to the Marxist view.
So rather than Sringeri Mutt's viewpoint on Adi Shankara,
Right.
the authentic Hindu insider view,
These guys
it
would
would be
hijack.
the outsider Marxist view being hijacked.
Right.
But it had the brand equity name.
It's so ridiculous. It's like a bunch of people whose writings are full of bad things about Adi Shankara, that he was this casteist guy and a Brahmin superiority guy, and
And they call it the Adi Shankara school of
so now,
philosophy of
so yeah, it's like somebody names something after you, and what they're going to teach actually is going to really undermine you.
Yeah.
And they can say that actually this guy's lineage has given us these rights.
Actually, we have the brand association
Right.
with Sringeri Mutt. They've approved it and authorized it.
And,
so you can't criticize.
and a lot of Indians with Hindu names are very proudly sitting on the board, making sure that this happens. So the world sees this as the authentic representation of Adi Shankara and the Vedic tradition.
So the
This would-
hijacking of the Vedic tradition would be basically inoculated and prevented from being critiqued because
Yes.
they say, hey, we're Hindus, look
Yes.
at who's on the board, and we have this brand association.
Right. So I've made enemies of these very powerful people because they are really upset at me since they were 1 month away from announcing it. 1 month away from
Wait,
announcing
so
it.
maybe back into the story. So this was happening.
This was happening.
You became aware of it.
And then I started writing about it.
Okay.
I started writing to expose it, and I got so many people upset at me. But I also got enough Hindus upset at the Sringeri Mutt administrators for doing this. And so the Sringeri Mutt administrators, when I visited them, said, we've got 2,000 faxes and emails telling us not to do this. I said, good for them. And they said, yeah, but you don't know, you've created a big scandal for us. I said, do you know what a big scandal it would be if you close the deal? And then people really, it will be not 2,000, but lakhs of people would come and get very ticked off at you. So you should be grateful to me. And what I asked them to do is due diligence. And I said, you guys are the investors. You guys would never invest in a deal without due diligence. So have you done due diligence on these scholars?
So once you made the investors, the people providing the money, aware that their goal, which is to promote Hinduism, was actually being hijacked and undermined, how did they respond?
They were very angry at me. This is the first chapter in this book. Very angry for being the
Angry
spoiler.
at you?
Yes, for being the
Shouldn't
spoiler.
they say, I mean, if I'm an investor wanting to contribute money to a cause and someone came to me and said, watch out, you're not going to get the return on this investment that you thought, they're cheating you,
Right.
I'd be so grateful and thankful that you gave me that information.
Right.
Why would they be angry?
Unless the goal of these guys were to get into the prestige of the Columbia University, New York City network of elitists, which would help them make deals elsewhere, and the little bit of money spent is trivial compared to the PR value. So if they're doing it not as Hindus, they are actually using Hindus, sacrificing it in order to get into some prestigious situation,
I
then
see.
I'm spoiling that.
There's the cabal club of these, I'm going to use that word, racist imperialist scholars of Max Muller's lineage. They have the brand association with Columbia, Harvard, Stanford.
And they can
And these
Trade.
Indian guys
Want to be at the
want
table.
give them money for
A seat at the
Hindus'
table.
chairs,
Yes.
so they get a seat at the table. They don't care if these same scholars are abusing and denigrating Hinduism,
Right.
because once they get a seat at the table, they can start networking in the Stanford.
They'll get the
I
money
want to
back.
say to any Indian financiers who are planning to do this or want to continue this, even after hearing this interview, I went to Stanford and Harvard. That network is easily accessible. You don't have to sacrifice Hinduism. In fact, Indians these days, I don't know if you saw the last Economist graph published maybe 12 to 14 months ago. Indians have the highest educational income level of any foreign-born population in the U.S. We have so much network energy built up that you don't need these brand associations anymore. You can easily do without them and present yourself in a much more authentic fashion. In fact, give me the money and I'll take care of a lot of these issues for you.
Yeah. So the thing is that I've ticked off a lot of people. First of all, I ticked off in this book, I've ticked off the cabal of scholars that I'm criticizing, I'm naming. Second, the Indian people funding them who now feel embarrassed. Third, some of the administrators at Sringeri who actually went all out and encouraged it and wanted to do this deal. I then went and met the Shankaracharya personally. Not easy to get an appointment, I got the appointment. And he didn't seem to be fully briefed about this deal. So it seemed that somebody was just doing the deal and telling him enough to get his blessings. But he didn't seem to be briefed. And so when I told him, Mohanji was there, when I told him that these are the kinds of interpretations that are coming, he said something to the effect that these guys don't know what they're talking about. They don't know our tradition. They're not authentic. And I was so happy to hear that. He didn't defend them. He was on my side in that sense. So I think this battle for Sringeri's future is one of the battles for Sanskrit. There's many battles in this battle for Sanskrit. The battle for Sringeri.
Actually, it's another form of cultural digestion.
It is, but some people were telling me that the goal is once you get Sringeri, you can get all the mathas. You can get Ramanujas, you can get Madhavacharyas.
Sure.
Then one will be in this university, another Ivy League, and pretty soon we'll have franchised the future representation, the ambassadorship of our civilization to people who don't care about it.
Who don't care about it, who distort it.
Because they're very prestigious and we want to be in bed with them.
What's funny is I just got an email from Yale as part of a newsletter subscribed to. $10 million donated to Yale School of Law by a Saudi businessman has made the Yale School of Law publish all sorts of positive aspects and create a whole endowment and chair for how Islamic jurisprudence represents a high level of legal scholarship. So again, let me ask you this question. Why is it that when Christian chairs or Islamic chairs are funded by the same financiers, they present an authentic...
Because they've done their due diligence, the person funding is knowledgeable, and he therefore negotiates. So what I told these guys is, if you want to do an Adi Shankara chair, I will tell you what to negotiate for. I will tell you that the only possible occupants of the chairs must be people who are properly indoctrinated and trained by the Sringeri Mutt. Therefore, they can represent the insider view. They must have that lifestyle. They must project that lifestyle.
They have to be authentic.
They have to be authentic. And they said it'll never fly. I said, if that'll never fly, then your whole thing is a sham. Because
why do they feel it won't fly?
Because because the people that are in charge, the people I'm criticizing that are in charge of that chair, if it
that's
was
just a question of negotiation.
No, but the people are the wrong people.
Yeah.
These scholars are the wrong scholars. They are so deeply Marxist and anti-Vedic in their school of thought. You'd almost have to do a chair in Columbia where the Columbia's own professors got nothing to do with it, and that'll never happen. So you see, the amount of changeover in the thinking, the thought process, the mindset has to be so dramatic that it's almost like
a solution for this. It strikes me is that what Hinduism's basic offering is spiritual technology and yoga technology and meditation technology and health technology to make people healthier, happier, and better able to relate to themselves, the other relationships they have, the environment, and to the divine energy in all of us. It strikes me that we don't really need the university because Hinduism is a experiential technology.
Correct.
We can take our own certification authority back, establish independent institutions that simply teach people about our spiritual technology, our yoga technology.
But I'll tell you something. Most professors of Jewish studies are practicing rabbis. So there's a double standard there. Mm-hmm. Why couldn't a Swami or an Acharya?
And most professors at the divinity school are practicing Christians.
Absolutely. So my thing to the Sringeri people was, why don't you insist that it'll be a practicing Acharya somebody from our tradition who's certified.
Just like Jewish rabbis
Yes.
who chair
Right.
Judaism studies,
Yes.
practicing Christians.
Right.
In fact, when I took my Islam courses at Stanford, they were all professed and chaired by practicing Muslims.
Yes.
So why is there a double standard?
Because our people have not insisted. We haven't demanded because we just don't have the courage to stick our neck out and demand that.
But is it really sticking our neck out when
But
it's
for
the
me, it's not.
standard of care and the standard of rule for all other chairs, for all other religious departments?
See, the thing is, this is where this business about Indian elitists find it fashionable to want secularism, almost like
But now we're talking about the Shingeri Mutt administrators.
But what I'm saying is that the Shingeri Mutt administrators have kind of, in my opinion, they bought into some of that. They're a bit ashamed, or let's say they're not assertive enough. I sat down and said, if I were you, I would say the person's lifestyle has to be in compliance with the teachers of Shingeri Mutt, because what you teach in Shingeri Mutt, that kind of a guru is the one qualified to go to Columbia and teach it. You cannot say that in the foreign country we misrepresent and distort who we are because we want to be in their good books. You don't want to be in their good books. You want to be in the good books of your own heritage. So this requires courage. And that courage requires getting rid of our inferiority complex.
Really, it's not so much, I would say, it strikes me as courage as so much as what you just said, getting rid of this inferiority complex.
Right.
That we cannot demand the same rights, the same values, the same treatments that's afforded to everyone else.
Right.
Wow.
So
I'm
you
so
see,
glad that you did this.
So the analogy would be somebody from Islam, some Saudi guy, giving a lot of money to the Vatican to set up an Islamic studies chair under the Vatican control. Now that would never happen.
That would never happen.
Or the Vatican.
Or a Jewish studies department giving the same control over to the Vatican.
Yeah. Why
or
would you
a
go to
mosque.
somebody who's ideologically in the opposite camp, give him millions of dollars to teach your tradition? Why would you sell out that way? I mean, it seems like a really kind of a hopeless.
I think there's just a lack of awareness that we actually have a lot of negotiating power.
Right.
We just don't want to use it
Right.
because we lack that awareness and inner strength.
And also, these guys were wanting to be in the good books of Columbia, so they were delivering them a big deal,
Right.
selling out what is called selling out.
They were sacrificing their authenticity,
Yes.
sacrificing the future generations' knowledge base,
Right.
by selling control of their
Brand value.
IP
Yes.
and brand value,
Yes.
simply so they could get an brand association with Columbia.
That's
without realizing that the demand from the market is actually for the spiritual technology,
Right.
not for Columbia.
Right.
In fact, those brand names values are going down,
Right.
whereas spiritual technology's brand value is going up.
Right.
So Shringeri Mutt, these Indian financiers, will be better served by yoking their associations and reclaiming the
Right.
spiritual brand value
Right.
rather than selling it.
Yeah, and they should be associated with a guru who's really at the cutting edge of technology, and they should say this is no nonsense. We're not going to compromise the authenticity, and whichever Ivy League or whoever wants to put up a chair under our conditions, and the guru will select the disciple and the students that he has trained, who he thinks are qualified, not some selection committee there, and he will appoint those people.
In just the same way everyone else does it.
Right. So it has to be it has to be a negotiating kind of an assertiveness. And you need negotiators who are very confident. And I did in a very gentle way. What I told these investors is the term due diligence because they understand. So I said, let me do due diligence for you on who these guys are. Because you would invest in a company only after checking out their products. And you know what they did to me? They sent out those guys' own PR articles which said that they're very good, they love India, they love Indian food, and they enjoy India, beautiful stuff and all that. And they said, that's our due diligence. So the person you're investing in, his own PR is their due diligence. What a silly thing for people who are supposed to be very savvy investors. I mean, these people made a lot of money as Wall Street investors. They know better that you don't do due diligence that way. You get some independent guy to do it. So they just didn't want to get to the bottom of what's going on.
Which actually, if they did, it would actually serve their objectives better. Because they would assert themselves
Depends on
much
their objectives.
more powerfully.
Well,
assuming even their objective is to simply break into the Columbia Ivy League network to close other deals, being perceived as a powerful, authoritative figure entering that network
Long-term view.
would better serve them long-term
Long-term
than
view.
being
Yes.
perceived as a weak sellout.
Yes.
They won't get the deals they want
Yeah.
being perceived that
But
way.
that approach would be great long term. It wouldn't be something you close in the next four weeks. It's something that you take some time. And
But as Wall Street guys, they know that long-term greedy is better than short-term
Yeah.
greedy. So the genesis of this book really came from the notion or your observation and encounter with how far the hijacking is proceeded.
Correct.
To the level of actually hijacking our own Shringeri Guru.
which is so amazing, such a huge thing. Shingeri Mutt being hijacked in this way, and that too, Sanskrit studies, the deep knowledge.
So what's the status of this once the Shringeri
Unknown.
Guru has been made aware of this?
Okay, so a year and a half ago, they were 4 weeks away from announcing, and it hasn't been done. So at least I put the brakes on. So at least I can say one.
And this book, The Battle for Sanskrit, a new book, your fifth book, directly addresses that story, that point, as the framework and context
of this book.
of
The
this
whole book is
So
framed.
more and more people will be aware of this hijacking happening.
And then I'll have more and more people angry at me for spoiling their thing.
You have guys like me, who grew up in America, who, I'll talk about my encounter
Yes.
with Hinduism is, I didn't really care about it. All my professors at Stanford and Harvard told me, and what I read about it, told me that it was pagan, heathen, stupid, evil. But then, when I started my company and it started doing well, I had to deal with a lot of stress. I had to deal with a lot of, emotional dynamics that would range from depression to exuberance to stressfulness, all sorts of things. And I was looking for, and being a technologist, I was looking for a technology that would help me solve these problems. And the funny thing was, the place where I encountered the technology that helped me get rid of my self-doubt, self-hatred, self-denial, that made me much more authentic, integrated, responsible, was the Hindu spiritual technology. And that's what made me really passionate and interested in this topic. I had to rediscover Hinduism, but I never rediscovered it as a political, oppressive, or dead religion. I rediscovered it as a technology. So I would say to anyone watching this interview that what Hinduism really is, why Rajiv's work is so important, is that he's casting light on how our technology is being stolen from us, how it's so useful to the world, and how it's really our pride. It's a gift for the whole world, and we should take pride from it
Right.
rather than letting these people exploit it, hijack it,
Right.
and distort it.
Right.
There's a lot of huge value there.
Right.
We need to reclaim that back.
Right. We need to take back Hinduism.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I just want to close with the first battle that we have won is that the book is out and they tried to ban it.
I received an email saying that the same cabal that you talked about. Now, at that time, I didn't realize it was a cabal, but after researching the issue, I really see that it is. It's a racist cartel. They were trying to ban your book from even being published.
That's correct. So the 6 months.
It really was a battle to publish the Battle for Sanskrit.
That is correct. That was the first battle. And these guys who talk about freedom of press, intellectual freedom, well, it doesn't
They were trying
work.
to ban your book.
It doesn't work both ways. It just works in their favor.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I'm writing a lot of critical things, but I'd like to come and debate, and you guys can come. And instead of one view, these people have been featured in the Jaipur Literary Festival for 8 or 9 years, sometimes 3 or 4 panels per year, and I have not. And when I asked the Jaipur Little Festival, why don't you introduce his book? It's coming out, the timing next week or week after the Jaipur Little Festival. They said we don't have space for it. It's too, we cannot, blah blah blah. All kind of nice politically correct reasons they gave me. But at the end of the day, they just didn't want this. And so the media,
they're just engaging in
the media,
platform denial.
yeah, the
they
media
don't want
is
this voice to be heard.
that is correct. The media is not going to feature this book in India, or they'll try to slam it. They'll get some critic to explain what's wrong with it rather than giving me the voice. The Hindu newspaper has never reviewed any of my books, but all of a sudden a negative article on me personally appears, which is very strange that your readers don't know who this Rajiv Malhotra is, and all of a sudden somebody who wants to write against him is given a front page.
So this book is shaking things up, because anytime a particularized personal attack is launched at an author whose previous books have never been book reviewed or covered by that newspaper or media publication,
It's
that
paranoia.
means they're scared.
They're scared. They're scared. So this unleashes a lot of battles. It'll be a battle against me. It's a battle between insiders and outsiders. It's a battle where the Shingeri Mutt may try to wash their hands and say, okay, that's old, we don't want to talk about it, which I hope they'll do. Or they may say, who the heck are you? We are in charge and you are nobody. In which case, I think there'll be a battle with a lot of their followers who are on my wavelength, who don't want them.
Who should read this book.
Who should read this. Many of them will read this book. So there's many battles that could happen.
I'm reminded of, in one of my graduate classes on philosophy and religious studies, we encountered this racist British fellow, Monye Williams.
Yes.
He has this whole kind of line about how he taught the Hindus their own laws. I feel that's what's exactly happening with this Ivy League academic cartel you're up against. These Western guys are trying to teach Hindus about Hinduism when we have Shingeri Mutt and other Muddams ready to teach us the authentic Hinduism, but they're trying to hijack the
It would be so strange if that if that were to happen, because if they were to take over the Shingeri representation in Columbia University, then generation 2 from now, that would become the normative view of Adi Shankara.
Yeah.
And then people would be talking about all those things about Adi Shankara, and what would Shingeri do? How would they feel about it? I mean, they would feel pretty lousy if they had created.
Well, that's the thing. Like, if they strike this deal in 2 generations' time, the dominant narrative will be that Adi Shankara was a Sanskrit, awful, racist,
he was a
patriarchal,
male-dominating guy, and he was against Muslims, even though Muslims didn't
even
exist.
exist back then.
It's a weird thing. One of the
I mean, they'd feel pretty bad.
One of the chapters is how this group of scholars have distorted the Ramayana. And would you believe, among all the different allegations, the most amazing one is that Ramayana was not popular among the public until 1,000 years ago. Hindu kings made Ramayana popular to fight Muslim invaders. So the Muslims became the Rakshasas, the Ravan, the evil was projected on them. And this way the Hindu kings became divine like Ram. So the divine Hindu kings wanted to mobilize the public against the against the invader. And so from the very beginning of its popularity, Ramayana has always been an anti-Muslim rhetoric, anti-rabble rousing, and therefore it is not surprising that it's being used like that today.
Even though when the Ramayana stories are being talked about, there's no such thing as Muslim or Christian presence in India.
But then what they've done is they've changed the dates to fit this narrative. They've said that Valmiki wrote this Ramayana a few centuries after Buddha. So Ramayana is very recent, according to their chronology. Ramayana is after Buddha. And it's written as a reaction. Buddha is positioned here as an anti-Vedic person.
As opposed to what he actually says, which is he is rediscovering and reviving the ancient yogic path.
Right. So that is correct. So Buddha is anti-Vedic, and then these evil, nasty, hegemonic Brahmins, according to this cabal, want to take
Same ones that are living on $50 a day, the poorest,
right.
According to the Wall Street Journal.
They want to take it back from Buddha, so they come up with Ramayana to repackage Vedic ideas into a nice story to sell it to the public. Yeah, and so this is almost like the Vedic Empire strikes back and want at the Buddhists and want to come back. So that's it's the dates are fabricated. Nobody is. I don't understand how they could justify those kind of dates. And I just want at least a debate.
Yeah, and they will not give an open debate because they'll know they'll lose. Because it's very easy, I feel, to deconstruct and dismantle, as you've done in all your 5 books, systematically, the lies, distortions and false narratives. So their only recourse is to stop you from participating in the festival,
And
to stop the media from
and
covering
to
you,
accuse me,
to accuse
me
you,
of a guy
to try to
who's
ban
bad
your
guy.
book,
Yeah.
to make you a bad guy,
Attack
when
me.
all you want is simply an open scholarly debate, which
That's
can be
all.
done in an open forum.
That is correct. And my call to action is not on the opposing side. I'm not saying you guys should stop, because I don't want to be accused of muzzling their freedom and all that.
Even though they try to ban your book.
Even though they try to ban, I have no.
You just want an open debate.
Yeah, my call to action is actually on traditional scholars to get out of their silos, become active, understand what the opposing sides are doing, and respond to them. Because I don't want to be the only one. I cannot be the only one. I cannot do this by myself. I can take the lead, open some doors, but I want many, many more traditional scholars to come on board.
Well, there's so many in Varanasi,
Yes.
South India, Sringeri Math, who, if they could just speak in Sanskrit to this cabal of
Right.
Sanskrit scholars,
Right.
and these Sanskrit scholars could not understand anything.
Right.
They could give all sorts of discourses,
Right.
authentic discourses,
Right.
that these scholars would not even be able to comprehend, even though they're called the experts in Sanskrit.
Right.
That is really what needs to happen,
Right.
I suppose.
But I call that the home team. So my job is to
So,
my
like,
purpose
what
here
you
is to
really
create a home
want
team.
is a systematic activation
Right.
of a strong, robust counter narrative
Right.
that addresses them from the standpoint of authentic facts,
Right.
authentic tradition,
Right.
authentic
Yeah.
explanations.
See, this kind of attitude I call intellectual kshatriya, and I want to build a home team of intellectual kshatriyas. They are the insiders, and they ought to, with in a respectful way, demand respect back from the other side. They ought to sit down and want to debate point by point all kinds of claims, because
Yeah.
then what happens is the truth will spread. Truth will spread from there, and I need people who are unemotional, very intellectual, hardworking, courageous, not going to sell out, and those are not easy to find.
Well, what's funny is, if you're talking about study of the Japanese language or the Chinese language or some other Asian language, the experts would come from that country.
Yes.
And they would be invited to speak at Western forums.
Right. And the journals are controlled. The China studies journals are controlled in China.
Yep.
And the Mandarin is a language, prestigious language in which China studies is done and not English. Whereas Sanskrit studies is studied in English.
Yeah.
And the journals are controlled in the West. And the most prestigious chairs are in Western Ivy Leagues. And the most prestigious place to get a degree, a PhD in Sanskrit is Oxford and Harvard and it's Columbia and places like that. Whereas in China, in the Mandarin studies and Chinese studies and so on, the most prestigious degrees are from China. The most prestigious places to publish your journal articles is in Chinese articles. The most prestigious places to go on and teach will be in China. That's how you establish your credentials.
They their authentic certification.
Because they never sold out. They were never colonized in the way we are colonized. So we're trying to say Indians are on par and we'll become a world power. But the point is, one of the ingredients of world power is a sense of history, a sense of greatness, a sense of
sense of rooted identity.
A sense of collectiveness, and something we won't sell out. And that pride is not there. I just don't find it. I mean, I'm very impressed.
There's a lot of scholars out there, indigenous Indian scholars in Sanskrit who are authentic.
Yes.
This will be a call to action to them.
This is a call to action. But that requires, we got to create, rather than funding millions of dollars there, we got to use the money here to create career paths. We got to, for one chair, you could create a whole college here and have fund 5 or 6 scholars.
For the amount of money for one chair at Columbia, we could create an institute in India that produces authentic PhDs in Sanskrit and Hinduism.
That is correct.
That can easily go out and produce the counter-factual narrative
That is correct.
to this false narrative
That is
being
correct.
promulgated by the Western cabal.
Yes.
I think that's a great idea.
Good. So we're going to work on it.
Fantastic.
Good. We're going to work on it. And we need young people like you who are on the wavelength of the insider wavelength to bring people together. We need you to help bring such people together, and then we can have seminars, briefing, because I'd like to do workshops where we go through point by point and we inform and educate our own scholars who get more vigilant, who are alert, and who want to get who want to join this home team. And I would like, in the last chapter, I've identified 18 topics of debate, which are very strategic. Like, for instance, did this language originate overseas or not? Was it really a Buddhist versus Vedic or more
Well,
less
if you
harmony?
look at Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, there's no notion of Buddhist versus Hindu.
Correct.
There's Brahma statues,
Right.
along with Buddha statues,
Right.
along with Garuda.
Right.
There's just no notion of this quote-unquote division. If you
Right.
look at the Buddhist texts
Similar in
themselves,
Nepal.
in Nepal as well.
Yeah.
You,
Several places where the Muslim invasion didn't have a huge devastating effect, because one of the things that happened in North India is that the Hindus were the Buddhists were in organized centralized viharas, because they had monasteries where they had 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, so they could be surrounded and finished off. The Hindu gurus were householders, many of them, and they were living in little groups here and there, ashrams, decentralized. Very difficult to take them on. Also, the akhadas fought back. They were militant. So, Buddhists got more easily destroyed. So, it's not that the Hindus, Buddhists fought each other.
yeah.
The Buddhists were more easily destroyed. The
Well,
Hindus
now
were.
I see that revisionist narrative promoted by the Stanford professor Audrey Trotsky and other false intellectuals that Muslim invasions never took place. That Muslim
They just came as
medieval
Sufi singers
Yeah.
to just kind of.
Yeah, all they did was engage in trade, and all the extant court records that the Muslim invaders themselves maintained are simply ignored.
Right.
And again, it's not to so much say that anything other than just like South Africa had to deal with the agony of apartheid, the Germany had to recognize what they did in the Holocaust. All we're simply asking for is the truth to be told,
Right.
and to accept and reconcile with it. But they're not allowing you to do that. But
Right.
you're still doing that bravely anyway.
I'm doing it anyway because that's what I've done for 25 years full time.
Yeah.
It's not a part-time hobby. It's not a weekend thing. I gave up whatever else I was doing, and this is what I do.
Well, at least you've inspired me. Even at the beginning of this interview, I had certain notions about what the importance of this battle. But after talking with you, I have to say I'm very much inspired and motivated. So if a guy like me, growing up in America, attending elite Stanford, Harvard University, starting my own tech companies, if he sees the value in this spiritual technology, I hope a lot of other people do.
Yes.
And I hope a lot of young people do. But most important, I hope that the whole world sees the value of our spiritual technology, and we're not ashamed of it.
Right.
We should take pride in it,
And we should be able to take on the opponents confidently.
confidently,
Yeah.
from that space of authenticity and integrity.
Right. Wonderful.
Is there any closing remarks you'd like to make for your fifth book, The Battle for
I
Sanskrit?
want to appeal to the viewers that you can buy this book on Amazon in most countries, United States, Canada, Britain, in India also on Amazon, or you go to or Flipkart, or you go to a major bookstore and they'll be able to do it. By the time you see this, my tour next few days will probably be over. But I'll come back. I usually come to India 3 or 4 times a year. And if you want to join my discussion group, you go to rajivmalhotra.com and you will see a lot of stuff about all my books. If you want to, and there's something called Join the Discussion. You fill in your name and all that stuff, and then you'll be part of a discussion group. If you want to know more about this book, we have thebattleforsanskrit.com. Because before I announce the title of any book, I like to reserve the domain.
Smart.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll hijack that from
Otherwise,
you too.
they hijack. Not only we got thebattleforsanskrit.com, but without the, we also have battleforsanskrit.com, and they both forward to the same place. So you can go there, and all this video will be uploaded, and all the other videos will be uploaded, and a whole lot of material about this battle as the battle goes. We'll just keep it going.
And we'll put the video on YouTube and other social media channels.
This will be on YouTube, and we have, luckily, we have a lot of followers on YouTube who subscribe to these videos.
Is there a specific YouTube channel?
The YouTube channel is youtube.com/Breaking India. The reason is that when Breaking India came out, we made the channel, and somehow YouTube does not allow you to change the name. Very strange. It's one of the few things I've tried to make it /Rajiv Malhotra, but so that would be common for all my books. But they won't. So it's youtube.com/Breaking India. If you go to rajivmalhotra.com, you will see how to join my e-group and what's the link to my Huffington Post articles and the YouTube places.
And your Twitter handle.
Twitter handler, Facebook. You will see all of that. So I hope to keep in touch with everybody.
Great.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And the Battle for Sanskrit strikes me as a seminal, important work to raise awareness and to really bring us all together, to really stand for Hinduism, because Hinduism is really a gift for all of humanity.
Right.
To achieve that three hatha karana, happiness with ourselves, the environment, and with the divine
Right.
energy.
And we have to, this is part of seva to our dharma, that we go and fight for it.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you again.
Wonderful. Take care.